Scars. Skull Point Alliance Book 3. By Emery Cole.
Chapter 1. Quick. Something was wrong. Quick noticed immediately. He wasn't sure if it was because the seabirds weren't around like they usually were, or that there was no breeze on the beach like there always was. For being early morning, only a few dedicated sun worshippers and joggers were on the beach. He walked along the water's edge that skimmed the flowing tide on the sand. After 20-some years here, it was hard to remember life before the island. Unfortunately, he would never be able to forget his life prior to the island's prior holder, Adriana Devereaux, finding him and Maze when they were kids on the run as fugitives. Wanted for murder. Now that was all history, thanks to Maze and their new NOPD contact, Rissa Belgrande. He was cleared of all wrongdoing. Quick looked down at his feet that were once at the water's edge, but the water was gone and there was only sand. What the hell? He looked toward the ocean and saw the water being sucked away like someone had pulled the plug in a tub. He'd never seen that before. His shifter instincts shouted to get the hell out of there. Death was coming. Then a gust of wind knocked him on his ass. Him, a big strong shifter pushed over by wind when there wasn't even a breeze. He put the two strange events together. His heart faltered with sudden fear and adrenaline. He let out a howl that would echo across the island. Warning! Prepare for danger. He turned to those on the beach, staring at him. Get everyone to the caves. A tsunami is coming.
Chapter 2. Vivian. In her dream, Vivian sat with her great-aunt Adriana on the island's beach, enjoying time together. Vivian treasured these moments after years of having no family to turn to, and being on the run from Ricardo, a damned warlock who wanted her dead. Adriana had so many stories about Vivian's parents when they were young. Still in the dream, Vivian asked Adriana, "What is it you wanted for the island?" Adriana smiled. "When I inherited the island from my great-grandmother many years ago, my mission was to help those who needed it." Adriana looked at her. "Now that you've been here for a bit, what have you decided to do with the island?" She had given that a lot of thought. Quick showed her all the wonderful elements the island community offered. Food, shelter, medical facility, beach, education. She couldn't have put together a better place to take care of others. "I'm going to carry on your mission and continue to help those in need." Adriana nodded. "That's my girl. I knew you were the right one for this job." Adriana's statement baffled Vivian. Even though she was in her mid-20s, she had no experience with shifters and very little experience with her own magical kind. She chewed on her bottom lip. "I don't know about that," she said. "I was pretty much like royalty in the coven. I was spoiled, didn't have to work for anything." "That may have been true," Adriana said, "but what about the last 10 years? The past 10 years had been hell, starting with her parents being killed in a car accident. Her uncle Frank had taken over the coven and wanted her dead. She had no idea why, until she came to the island and discovered its magic and that it needed an heir to run it, her." Vivian sighed. "I've learned a lot in the past years. Mostly how to survive on my own. I suddenly finding myself on the streets with nowhere to go." She'd been in New York at the best magic school, when it all went to hell with her coven in New Orleans. One second she was in class with her friends. The next, she was on the streets with a bag of her belongings. "I hate that your uncle is such a bastard. Dumping a kid on the streets like that. I wish I could get my hands on Frank Bonaparte. I'd rip his balls off and feed them to him." Vivian gasped. "Aunt Adriana, I can't believe you just said that." Her hand covered her smile. "You haven't heard half of what my late husband heard." She laughed. "He used to get on me all the time for sounding like a sailor. Sometimes you just have to talk tough to get others to listen." Adriana looked over the waves, softly rolling onto the sand at the base of their lounge chairs on the deserted beach. But when it came to my magic, he was speechless. Turmoil and worried rolled in Vivian's stomach. That was something else she was worried about. Adriana turned to her. Vivian, I know you were 16 when Frank had you expelled. How much magic had you learned by that point? Her face was scrunched up in disgust at the mention of Frank's name. Good grief, Vivian thought, even in dreams the woman could read her mind. Adriana laughed. Of course I can. It's your dream. Now tell me. I had learned how to cast some spells and make a few potions, but... That's good, Adriana said. With a little more training, you'll be able to run the island. Now what about the but part? Vivian cringed in her chair. This wasn't good. See, thing is, I met this guy. Ah, Adriana nodded. Ricardo? How does he relate to your knowledge? Did he train you? Adriana's brows rose high on her forehead. Vivian imagined, being the apprentice to someone so evil wouldn't be good. No, not at all. Adriana let out a relieved sigh. Just the opposite, actually. Explain, Adriana asked. Vivian thought back to that time so long ago. I was working as a waitress at a bar. Guys hit on us all the time, as well as puked on our shoes. I was too busy trying to find a roof cheap enough to put over my head, so I gave the male population no mind. Then one night, my eyes were drawn to a stranger standing by the door. His lips were moving like he was talking to someone, but he was alone. It was so strange. He was fishing, Adriana said. It's a chant used to find someone in a crowd and draw them to you. She sighed. The bastard probably scried to find your general location, then searched you out. Sorry, go on. I need to know how much you were together. Vivian didn't like the sound of that. Could Adriana disinherit her now? Could she kick her off the island? Would she be homeless again? We weren't together much. Something about him gave me the creeps. Adriana smiled. You have good instincts. Go on. Yeah, well, I told him I didn't want to see him, but he wouldn't leave me alone. I had to quit my job and find a different one to get away. After that first night, he put a locating spell on me, I think. That was the only explanation how he found her so quickly, when she barely stayed in one place for a few days. Adriana groaned. That bastard. So every time you used your magic, he knew instantly where you were. Vivian nodded. Let me guess, you stopped using magic altogether. Vivian nodded again. She hated having to do that, but it was her only choice. Why would he hunt me like that? She asked. Frank ruled the coven. I never would. I had no money. What did he want from me? He must have known who you were. Adriana shifted in her chair to face Vivian. Ricardo was a close childhood friend of my older brother. As friends do, they spent a lot of time at each other's homes. Wait, Vivian said, Ricardo is your age? But he looks just a few years older than I do. Glamour child. Oh right. That was so not good. How could she have forgotten something so basic? Adriana added, be wary of what your eyes tell you. It's not always the truth. Back to Ricardo though. I was raised knowing I would inherit the island when the time came. So oft times the island was mentioned around the house. I guess that's how he heard about it. Anyway, long story short, he pretended to want to bind with me, which was scary for me being as young as I was. What's binding? Vivian asked. She was frustrated, knowing so little about her culture. You probably hadn't heard that term. The practice isn't done anymore, because of its tendency to lead to trouble. Adriana paused for a moment. Binding is a step or 10 past marriage. The two witches carry out a ceremonial chant that combines their magics into one that's shared between them. You lost me, Vivian butted in. How can you combine magic? What does that mean? It's like adding the magical powers from each person together to make a single much stronger power. That doesn't sound so bad, Vivian said. Why did it scare you? Because that augmented power can only reside in one person. The other person has access to it, as granted only. Shit, that was scary. So you're saying that one person gives all their magic to another person, and can only use it if the other lets them? Adriana nodded. I see how that can lead to trouble. One guy on an immense power trip. Exactly, Adriana said. All known written existence of the ceremony has been destroyed. Only those alive during that time know about it. And Ricardo wanted to do that to you? To gain strength? What has that to do with the island? Vivian asked. Adriana straightened on her lounge chair. This is important, pay attention. I'm teaching you something about the island. Vivian sat forward, eager to learn. This island is in our family, in your blood, child. Which means it is part of you as you're a part of it. Vivian was trying really hard to understand this, but Adriana sounded crazier than anything. How could she be part of an island? Just didn't make sense. Adriana continued. If you were to bind with Ricardo, he would take your magic, and then have complete control over the island and all it can do. All it could do, she thought. What can a pile of dirt do? She was about to ask, when Adriana sat forward in her chair and stared at the water. After a long moment she said, It's time to go, child. But I have questions, Vivian stammered. Adriana kissed her on the forehead. I'm sure you do, hun, but you need to go. The island is under attack.
Chapter 3. Quick. Quick rushed the few people on the island's beach inland, with instructions to get to the caves at the highest point. The wind picked up twofold in seconds, as if someone turned on a megafan. The palm trees flapped their leaves. Sand blasted his bare arms and face. Mays, his second in command, came around the corner of the security office. A sudden gust knocked him against the building. Quick noted the surprise on Mays's face. Yeah, he had no idea what was going on either. But the safety of these people was his responsibility, so he'd worry about what and why later. What's happening? Mays yelled over the noise. Tsunami. Quick stopped in his tracks, nodded and pointed toward the bungalow where most people stayed. Get everyone to the volcano. Now. Mays sprinted to the office to assign jobs to the security team. A lounge chair from the cabana slammed into Quick's back. Shit. Everything outside suddenly became a deadly missile. People began popping their heads out their front doors to see what was going on. He cupped his hands around his mouth and yelled his command to get to higher ground. Some had come out of their homes and looked around, questioning the strange weather. Everyone sprang into action, either going back inside to wake family or going next door to warn neighbors. In a very short amount of time, the quiet and solitude of the morning became mass chaos as many rushed around helping others and heading into the forest toward the caves. Mays ran to his side. The men are out gathering supplies and spreading the word to outlying homes. Then it hit him. He knew what he was forgetting. He pointed to a young man passing close by. Ian, he shouted above the wind, follow us. Quick whipped his shirt off in preparation to shift. The other two did the same. He shouted to one of the women and pointed to his clothes. She nodded and came their way. She would gather their garments and take them to the cave for when they shifted back to their human forms. Mays asked, What are we doing? Quick dropped his shorts, fur already sprouting on his arms. Rescuing the villagers on the other side of the island.
Chapter 4. Vivian. Vivian startled awake in her bed, to the sounds of something slamming into the outside walls of her bedroom. A loud crashing noise outside jolted her out of bed. She hurried to the window to peek outside. It was still rather early in the morning, and she needed a gallon of coffee before her brain started working. What she saw outside was way more effective than any amount of caffeine. Her back porch furniture had blown into the grass. The umbrella lay smashed against the wall, table still attached. What bothered her more was the people running into the woods. Some were shifted into their animal, others still in their nightclothes. She slipped her robe on and went to the door. As she opened it, a gust of wind blew against it hard, whacking her to the ground and jamming the knob into the wall behind it. One of Quick's security men stood outside the entrance, his fist in the air as if ready to knock on the door. He dashed inside to help Vivian to her feet. "What is going on?" she asked. "Quick says a tsunami is coming." The guy didn't sound very convinced. She said as she got to her feet, "You don't believe him?" "No, ma'am." "I mean, yes, ma'am," he sputtered. "It's just nothing like this has ever happened before you were here, and I've been here a long time." He shrugged. "Everyone needs to get to higher ground. To the caves in the mountain. Now." Vivian knew where that was since she first met Adriana, after falling through a portal or something in the side of a solid rock wall. "I know where that is. Thank you." The guy left and she pried the doorknob out of the wall and forced the door closed. She rushed into her bedroom to change and saw a big bag of blankets and one filled with small bottled waters. "Where did those come from?" she asked the empty room. "Sheesh." She was losing it, talking to herself. As she rushed into clothing, the thought occurred to her that maybe the island could do things. She'd think about it later. Now they had a crisis to deal with. Vivian grabbed the bags and hurried out. Seeing the medical center, she decided to see if the doc needed help. Those types of supplies were always needed, even if shifters healed quicker. They weren't invincible. Inside, the nurse and a teen rushed around between rooms, loading items into a couple plastic containers. She asked the girl, "Is Dr. Brown here?" The girl pointed down the hall as a female voice rang out. "Down here, Vivian." Vivian continued along the hall to the back room, where the doctor was opening a locked cabinet. "Can I help do anything?" Vivian asked. The doctor pulled bottles and needles from the shelves and dumped into a small container. "I think you've already done enough." The reply was terse, shocking Vivian. "Actually," the doc continued, "you haven't done anything." Vivian didn't know Dr. Brown well enough to know if she had dry sense of humor, or if she meant anything by what she said. This was the first time Vivian received negative vibes from anyone on the island. Everyone had always been so happy-go-lucky. She didn't know how to deal with this confrontation. Instead of causing an argument that could take precious time, Vivian backed out of the room and headed out the front door, retrieving the bags. People streamed around her into the woods in the direction of the caves. She joined in. 2 men quickly took the bags from her and moved on. She stopped and looked back at the area. It was a mess with lounges and umbrella tables blown everywhere, but nothing was beyond repair. The island was in good shape to weather this tidal wave. She turned back to the woods and decreasing stream of shifter hurrying that way. The words of the guy at her door earlier came to mind. "Nothing like this has ever happened before you were here." And then the doctors. "You've done enough." Actually, you haven't done anything. Were they implying this was her fault? How the hell could a windstorm and tsunami be her doing? Shit, she could barely cast a spell to make a charm. Her dream with Adriana flashed in her mind. Adriana seemed very upset when realizing Ricardo made her stop using what little magic Vivian had learned in school. But Adriana seemed upset with everything to do with the bastard. Could this be a spell Ricardo conjured to destroy the island? Shit. How could she fight someone like him? She couldn't. Would they all die?
Chapter 5. Quick. Damn it. Quick was furious with himself for not thinking of the villagers sooner. Of anyone on the island, they needed help the most. The village had always been a curiosity to him. Adriana told him the tribe was composed of the remaining few of the originals from the island. Consisting of old, and he meant old people and some young ones, rarely did anyone from there interact with the shifters. They were friendly and all, just not real sociable folk. Adriana occasionally talked with their chief about the island and its magic, but Quick wasn't part of those conversations since he was a shifter. He had no use for magic since he couldn't wield it. It sucked but made sense. He was glad Vivian was brought here by the powers that be. He didn't need magic if he had her by his side. Passing the tree line onto the small plateau where this people built their shack-like huts, Quick could see the water had retreated a distance here also. The beach not too far below was empty, so hopefully everyone was up here in the village. As the three of them, Maze and Ian on his tail, raced toward the wood and grass structures, Quick saw people moving around between huts rather quickly for their age. Hopefully, they knew what was going on and preparing. Reaching the housing, the three shifted into human form. From the closest hut, a man came out and handed them pieces of material with sinew strings. Quick looked at the sparse bundle in his hand, then looked at the man. Quick glanced over his shoulder to see Maze and Ian had the same questioning look. The old man rolled his eyes and pointed to his crotch. He wore a loincloth made of the same material as they held. "Ah, got it," Quick said. "Guess they want us dressed." Maze chuckled. "Seems one size fits all, sorta," he said, studying the garment he put around his torso. After all three were covered, the old man returned to his hut. "Wait," Quick called out. "We need to talk with Chief Earthen." "I am here, Quick." A distinguished man, as distinguished a person wearing a scrap with furs draped over his shoulder could be, emerged. "I hadn't expected you so soon, Wolf. Your instincts are strong." Quick wasn't going to even dignify that with an answer. "Chief Earthen, thank you for seeing us," Quick said. The older man laughed. "Not that we have much choice or time," he said. The guy who handed them their attire scurried out of his shack, carrying a bundle of possessions. The chief shouted to the man in their native language, then turned back to Quick. "Please follow me." He headed into the group of dwellings. "Sir," Quick asked, hurrying to catch up with the man's long strides, "do you know what is happening?" The man looked grim. "I do, although I can't believe it." He shook his head. "I would never have guessed if I wasn't living through it myself." "What is it?" Maze asked. The chief stopped and turned to them. "The ocean is preparing to swallow the island." Quick just about shit his loincloth. He had been right. A damn tsunami. "You two," the chief pointed to Maze and Ian, "help who you can. We need to get everyone to the cave." Quick gave a nod when the shifters looked to him. They scattered. "Quick, with me, please." "You speak English well," Quick said. "Have you been to the mainland?" The chief laughed. "I have never left the waters surrounding this island. And I am not speaking English." That stumbled Quick's step. "What?" he replied. "You are speaking English." The chief slapped him on the back. "You still have a lot to learn about the island and what it can do." What it could do. How could a pile of dirt and rock do anything? "I see the question on your face. You can believe it or not, but you do understand what I'm saying," the old man said. Yes, Quick understood every word, but his brain didn't comprehend what was being said. "Shouldn't we hurry?" Quick replied. "I don't know how much time we have before the tsunami hits full force." "I agree," he said. "We don't have much time at all." The chief stopped and pulled a flap back on a small wooden teepee. Inside, Quick was amazed at the spaciousness. In fact, the span was impossible by what was seen from outside. The chief handed him a box with old parchments and rock plates with etchings. They looked ancient. The next thing the man laid in the box was a color photo of a young family. The husband in the picture bore a distinct resemblance to the old guy. The contradiction between the two items spun his head. More and more items filled the box. "Chief," Quick said, remembering what he'd mentioned earlier, "why would you not believe what was happening if you hadn't seen it yourself?" Even though Quick hadn't seen adverse weather here in his 20 years, didn't mean there never had been any. The chief sighed. "The balance is off. It has not been this way for over 100 years." "What balance?" Quick hadn't noticed anything wrong. Well, some strange things had been happening since Vivian arrived, but... "The magic, boy," the chieftain huffed. "The magic?" He put a couple books in the box. "There is a balance to everything. If the dark is more than the light, then times are bad. If the light is more, then the dark grows stronger waiting for its time. With balance, all is in accordance. Wonderful. Cryptic poetry, Quick thought. So what is it here? Is the dark too strong? The chief snorted. What do you think? The island is dying.
Chapter 6. Ian. For old people, Ian thought, they were moving fast and quite efficiently. Their belongings appeared simple, easily packed and carried to higher ground. Until now, anyway. The woman in this hut flat out refused to leave. "Ma'am, please," Ian begged. "The wind is howling and a really big wave of water is going to wash away this area." She smacked him over the head with her rough-hewn cane. "I know what a tsunami is, child. Don't patronize me." "No, ma'am." Ian shrank away. "I don't mean to. But we have to go. You'll get swept out to sea." She rose from her worn chair. "I doubt that." The woman hobbled farther into the back, and he quietly followed, ready to grab whatever she needed and run. He felt honored that Quick had chosen him to help, and he was going to do all he could to make the man proud. Ian arrived here with his mother a few years ago, after running from his drug-addicted stepfather. They had stayed at shelter after shelter, but somehow his stepfather found them again and again. On their run through Louisiana, they heard about the island and knew that would be the only safe place for them. They headed east on I-10, headed for the Big Easy. Their second day in the city, his mom parked their 1980 Plymouth in a small parking lot of a public marina, hoping she could find out something in the area. He was to wait for her in the car. She never came back. He set out the next day to look for her, and stopped at the first cafe he came across to see if anyone had seen her. There he met a white-haired man who said he'd help search if the boy would promise to stay in a safe place while he looked. Turned out the safe place was the island. The white-haired man, who was a lawyer, never found his mother. Her photo was put up at the police station on their missing persons wall. The lawyer said his mom was probably a victim of crime. He said that shifters were targeted in the city, especially those that were alone. Ian thought his stepfather found her and killed her. From that moment, the island became his home and the people there became his family. Adriana was kinder than anyone he'd ever met. He devoted himself to this place and everyone around him. He hoped to work in the prestigious security department with Quick and Maze after he finished the special training. So yeah, this woman was going to be protected whether she needed it or not. The old lady in front of him suddenly turned, then jerked back. "You still here, boy? I told you I'm not leaving my home." The ground below their feet began to tremble. Something was happening. Ian didn't know what, but he wasn't waiting around to find out either. He chucked the woman over his shoulder and ran for the door. She squealed and kicked her legs, but was no match for his shifter strength and agility. He shoved the door open and sprinted up the steep incline from her hut to higher ground. The earth vibrated and came loose under his feet. Morphing his toes to bring out his wolf claws, he was able to dig in and get traction. The lady over his shoulder stopped wiggling. "Well, I'll be." He glanced back to see what had her attention. The first wave crashed on shore, taking out her shack and most of the village. Ian didn't see anyone else in the lower area. He hoped they were all evacuated. Too late now. The water kept coming higher as if racing for him. Fresh adrenaline and shifter strength kicked him into high gear up the cliff's path. At least once, the wind threatened to blow them backward down the hill. Reaching the woods, the wind was less dramatic, and he placed the woman on the ground. She thanked him, slapped him on the ass, then walked toward the caves, mumbling about the younger generations. He remained behind for a minute, watching the long-time homes of these strange people wash away in the violent rip currents.
Chapter 7. Vivian. Native islanders and shifters alike hunkered down in the cave, the highest part of the island, waiting for the hurricane-like wind and tsunami to pass. Every crash of waves shook the ground inside the cave. Vivian could only imagine what it looked like outside. Living her entire life in landlocked places, she didn't know what to expect or how to handle situations like this. She passed blankets, bottles of water, and jerky to those huddled around boulders. With each group she went to, hushed whispers stopped when she arrived. Did that mean they were talking about her? Her heart churned with dread. Would they kick her off the island? Could they? Discreetly hovering around a group of kids, she listened in. They were scared, but nothing over the top. My mom says nothing like this ever happened here until the new Ms. Devereaux showed up, one kid said. My dad says it's because she's not strong enough of a witch to take care of us, another piped in. I heard the old guy say the island was dying, a third one contributed. That last bit of information scared the hell out of her. Was it dying because of her? She looked around for Quick and found him at the cave's entrance, watching the weather. She hurried to him. He turned before she reached him, his arms immediately open. She buried her face in his chest and fought the tears ready to pour. Hey love, he said, concern in his voice, what's wrong? And don't tell me nothing because I could smell your hurt before you got here. She nodded, but couldn't speak around the lump in her throat. Quick's hold on her tightened and she breathed in his smell, woods and fresh air. It comforted her turmoil. After a moment, she was able to talk. Is the island really dying? Quick held her out at arm's length. Where did you hear that? She kept her eyes down. A bunch of kids were talking about what their parents were saying. Her watery eyes rose to his face. Am I not good enough to be here? Should I go? The words hurt like hell to say and harder to think. Quick wrapped her tightly again. No, Vivian. If you weren't the right one, Adriana would have never brought you here. That's true, she thought. But everyone makes mistakes. She had to admit, she felt inadequate and intimidated by the magic. What if I learn more spells and increase my skill set? Do you think that would help? He was quiet for a moment. I'm sure that will help in more ways than one. But I don't want you leaving to search out the world for some long-bearded, hippie guru wizard warlock type who will keep you locked away from me. But who will train me then? I can't go to the witch coven in New Orleans. My uncle will kill me. He pulled her back again, brows lowered in a frown. Frank, my uncle, became the head witch in the city after my parents died. Vivian couldn't remember how much she'd told Quick of her family and their situation. When I was working in New York saving up money to get home, I learned that if I went back, he'd get me out of the way for good. He actually told someone that. Quick's arms became a tight vice. I won't let him touch you, he said. Don't ever worry about that. Yeah, she knew Quick would do his best to protect her, but there was little anyone could do against a powerful witch or wizard. He continued, the attorneys and Sarah are all powerful. When this is over, we'll talk with them and see who they think would be best to train you. While we're there, we'll ask them what they think could have caused this strange weather. They know more about this island than anyone else. He paused. Well, maybe not more than the chief. Vivian pulled away. Are those the villagers I've heard you mention? Her eyes landed on the older group of people heaping to themselves. Quick turned slightly to look over his shoulder. Yeah, that's them. Maybe we should talk to them to see what they know, she replied. Do they speak English? Quick laughed. Yes. And no. What does that mean? Never mind, he replied. Let's introduce you to them. They made their way toward the villagers. On the way, many shifters waved and said hello, welcoming Vivian to the island. A few sat back and kept their mouths closed. When they approached the elderly group, a thin, tall man stood. Vivian was a bit taken aback by the small amount of clothing he wore. Chief Earthen LaRouge, Quick said, this is Vivian Devereaux, Adriana's great niece. The man inclined his head. It is an honor to meet the descendant of such a great woman. Vivian blushed, though she didn't know why. He wasn't talking about her. Thank you, Chief Earthen. It's really my honor. You've been here forever. I'm just a newbie. The chief raised a brow. Quick hid a laugh and a fake cough. She did not appreciate that much. Chief, may we talk with you a moment? Vivian asked, since Quick was still coughing. Of course, he gestured to the group. We converse better as a whole with full knowledge instead of individually with partial knowledge. Okay. She guessed he meant that he wanted to talk with the everyone around, not just him, Vivian, and Quick. That was fine with her. The circle shifted, and space was made next to the chief for them to sit. After all had settled, Vivian asked her burning question. Is the island dying because of me? Everyone in the group tittered, except her and Quick. She figured laughing was better than crying in this instance. The chief answered yes. And no. That's real helpful, Quick mumbled. Vivian elbowed him, giving him a stink eye.
Chapter 8. Quick. Quick noticed the wind had died down. He wondered if it just happened, or if it had been calmer for a while. He was so enwrapped in the story, nothing outside of that world registered. Excuse me, Chief. The weather is better, and I'm going to scout the area before everyone leaves to check the safety of things. The chief gave a nod. Very wise, Quick. Please be careful, the old man said. Vivian looked at him. He told her, you need to stay and watch over the people. They are your concern while the island is mine, right now. He kissed her forehead and headed out. The first glance from the cave entrance wasn't too bad. Lots of trees were downed, some snapped in half, but for the most part it still looked like a forest. He wasn't high enough on the mountain to see the whole island. He wasn't even sure if the entire island could be seen from the top of the volcano's mouth. It was way the hell up there, though. He imagined you could from up there. At the base of the mountain, all the rock rubble was gone. It was as if someone with a broom came through and swept it clean down to the base stone itself. Same for the woods. No dead leaves or pine needles littered the ground. Just large trees that had fallen, and thick branches that didn't wash out with the water. When reaching the plateau the village was perched on, his heart broke. Everything was completely gone. Not a stick to be found. And the beach that used to go 50 feet out was a narrow swath of sand, barely going beyond the island's edge. Would all the sandy areas along the coastlines be like that? So much of the island landmass would be gone. He wondered if any cliffs had eroded. That would be bad because of some of the high bluffs on the north side. One area in particular he worried about was the spot where the kids liked to jump in from a ledge on the cliff. It could be unsafe now. He needed to check it out. With a sigh, he headed back to the cave. The villagers wouldn't be going home this morning. Shit, it was still morning. Felt like days later. After informing the chief of their situation, the decision was made for the villagers to stay in the guest quarters. They would go from there once everything was settled. Vivian started packing to go back. Quick called several men along with Maze and Ian to help clear the path. As the men made their way out, Quick noticed how the shifters looked at Vivian. Some with disdain, some with anger, but most staying away from her, not offering to help. He'd talk with Vivian when they got back to see what they should do. Quick's group of men cleared a path in record time. With only tree trunks and limbs down, everything else washed away, there wasn't a whole lot to move. He stood on the rise, looking over the buildings. It was a mess, with chairs scattered and mud and dirt on everything, showing how high the water line came up. There looked to be some damage to the end of the medical center, and the lowest set of bungalows had been mostly destroyed. And of course, most of the beach was gone, but other than that they fared much better than the villagers. The men started cleanup, and soon the others caught up to them. People spread from the tree line, going different directions to check their personal spaces. Some folks seemed to be in shock over the whole thing. This was something he'd never experienced, he could understand. One of the first on the beach to pick up debris was Ian. Quick watched him. He seemed methodical, smart, thorough. Quick could tell his wolf was strong, but not fully matured yet. Maze stopped next to Quick. Followed his eye line to the boy. That the one who lost his mom. Never found her. Yeah, seems like last year or two when he came to us, but it's been over 10 I guess by his age. Maze said, I think he's around 21 or 2. His wolf is smart. He in training? Quick asked. He is, Maze replied. Top of his class. Everybody is pulling for him. Seems all the islanders love him. He arrived without a family and gained a whole community. Why do you ask? Quick shrugged. Always on the lookout for new recruits. We have to retire sometime. Oh yeah, Maze fumbled. Speaking of status quo. We're not, but go on. He could tell his Maze was itching with a question. Spit it out. I ain't got all day, he said. Maze wavered foot to foot. You know, I thought the way the island worked was that it sort of fixed itself, you know. Not that any damage has ever happened, but you get the point. Yes, he got the point all right. That point he was trying not to think about. The point that said something was terribly wrong, and it probably had to do with Vivian. Maybe training would be the answer, he thought. They needed to speak with Gerald Wizen and Sarah from the cafe. They had to help, or their beautiful island might become deserted.
Chapter 9. Ian. Ian helped pick up scattered chairs and debris from the smashed cabanas that once stood close to the now non-existent beach area. This really sucked, he thought. His little paradise bubble was popped. So much for a perfect place to live. He hoped this wouldn't become a regular event. He heard someone call his name. He looked around to see Quick wave him in. He hurried up the grassy hill to where Quick and Maze stood. Ian, I need you to walk the perimeter of the island to check the safety of the cliffs and where the kids high dive. I want to know how deteriorated they are. Yes, sir. He hurried to where the beach used to be and started surveying the damage. From there, he skimmed the edge looking for fallen rock in the water directly below or loose edges. On his study of the island bulkheads, most looked to be sound. But the precipice at the base of the volcano was damaged. Rocks had fallen into the water, and the ground was loose and gravelly at the top. The caves were so close to there, he was surprised they didn't hear the crash of the rock crumbling to the water. But then the wind was very loud, traveling through the trees. He was coming to the jumping spot the kids used. He couldn't, the number of times he'd launched his body into the air from the ledge. It was a sense of freedom, of floating in the air. Oftentimes, he wished he could have been a bird shifter instead of wolf. But birds didn't rank high on the badass scale. Unless he was a pterodactyl. Ian stepped onto the ledge and bounced on his toes a few times. Seemed solid still. Didn't see any rocks under the water below. He deemed it safe. The soft island breeze ruffled his hair. It was nice to have that back. The sun shone on the water, highlighting the small wave crests here and there. Then something far out caught his eye. He wasn't sure, but it could be a person floating on something. Something white. Standing on the ledge, he dove in and swam the distance. The closer he came, the clearer the image. Not only was it a person, but a female. Reaching her, he noted she lay on a piece of smooth plastic with singed edges. His wolf picked up hints of smoke. He floated around to the other side so he could see her face. His shifter hearing picked up her heartbeat. It was strong and steady. Thankfully, she wasn't dead. The only thing he could do was take her onshore and up to the clinic. Dr. Brown would be able to take care of her from there. Like a tugboat, Ian pushed the craft toward the beach area. He wasn't too far from there when jumping from the ledge. Battling water that was rougher than normal, he managed to drag the piece of plastic with the woman on it onto the sand. He gently lifted her and carried her up the hill. Most of the people seemed to be in their homes, probably making breakfast and resting after the morning's ordeal. He was getting hungry, too. All this exercise and no fuel. His wolf growled at him for being so careless. Several others stared at him, wondering who he was carrying and what happened. He'd get those answers first, then they could know. A bystander opened the clinic's front door. Dr. Brown came around the corner into the front area. She stopped when she saw the girl in his arms. She rushed them down the hall into an exam room where he laid her on the bed. Her chestnut hair fanned over the white pillowcase. "What happened, Ian?" the doctor asked. "I don't know," he said. "I was checking the cliffs and stuff for Quick, and I saw her in the water. She was kinda far." The doctor pressed a stethoscope to her chest. Her heart is strong. Lungs sound clear. She's not a shifter. Next, she flashed a small pin light into the patient's eyes. Satisfied with the results, she stepped back. "Well, Ian," Dr. Brown said. "Other than some scratches and burns on her arms, she seems to be all right. I want to keep her here until she gains consciousness. Just to be sure." "Yeah," he said. "I should report to Quick anyway." "Not a problem," a voice at the door said. "Here I am." Ian turned. Quick assessed the situation. "Scratches and burns, you said?" Dr. Brown nodded. "Just surface injuries. Nothing big. Little sunburn on the back of her knees." Quick turned to him. "Was she on a craft or anything?" Ian took him to the beach area and showed him the white material. "Fiberglass," Quick said. "It has an expensive paint coating. Very slick." He sniffed at the burnt edges. "My guess is she was on a fancy boat that exploded and managed to get herself on a piece of floating debris before she passed out." That was more than Ian had figured out. Quick sniffed at more edges. "Lots of fuel. Could be from an explosion. Might have caused the explosion. Who knows?" He hefted the fiberglass over his head. "Let's get it inside out of the weather. Could be important later." "Sir," Ian said as he caught up to the man, "the report on the island that you sent me out for?" "Oh, right. What did you find?" "Most everything is normal except the cliff at the volcano. It lost some big chunks to the water, and the top ground is shaky the closer to the edge you get. The jumping spot is solid. No worries there." "Good job, Ian. Thank you for your help." After a moment of silence as they walked to the security room, Quick asked, "How's your training going?" "Training is good. We're set to finish classes in a month," Ian said. "Great," the chief said. "What are your plans after that?" "Heading back to the mainland to find a job." Ian chewed on his answer. His dream was to work with security on the island. "I'm not sure yet, sir. Kinda would like to stick around here if there's anything to be had." "Really?" That seemed to have surprised Quick. "How good are you with computers?" "Top of my class, sir." "Fabulous," Alvarez said. "Go and check on that girl. She may be waking any time." His cheeks felt hot. Chapter 10. Ian. Ian snuck into the medbay where the mysterious girl was still on the bed. She hadn't moved, it seemed. He came closer. "What the hell are you doing?" She chose that moment to wake up. How did he get so lucky all the time? "Sorry, he backed against the wall. Her eyes wandered around the room. "Wait. I'm not in the compound, am I?" "I don't know what a compound is, but you're in the medical clinic on the island," Ian said. She looked at him. "I'm Ian." "What island?" "I don't know any island around where I was that has a hospital," she said, almost in a sneer. Well, the island's called Skull Point K and—" She eyes wide, fixed on him. "Skull Point? Seriously?" Ian nodded. She laughed. "I'm sorry. I just couldn't help myself," the lady said, a giggle escaping. "Well," Dr. Brown put her stethoscope on her chest, "it's good to see you're alive and well. How do you feel?" "Fine." "Do you remember what happened to you? Why you were floating in the water?" the doctor asked. She stared at the ceiling. "I remember being on a boat with some friends." She rolled her head to face the wall. "I don't remember anything else." "Don't worry," Dr. Brown said. "It's very common for victims to not remember the traumatic event itself." "Am I free to go?" "I would like have some paperwork done, describing the event and injuries." "I don't even know your name." "Oh, I'm Chandra Nadas." Dr. Brown pulled Ian forward. "You can thank Ian for saving you. If he hadn't seen you on the water, you could have died." "Thank you so much, Ian." He swallowed hard. "I'm just glad you're safe." The doctor turned to him. "Would you stay with Chandra while I find Quick?" He nodded. "I'll be right back." The doctor left and he swallowed again. Chandra sat up. Let's go. Ian pushed her back on the bed. No, the doctor said to wait. She'll be right back. But I feel fine, Ian. She slowly slid her fingers up his arm. Goosebumps covered his body. There's no need to stay here if I'm not sick, is there? The doctor said to stay. We're really on Skull Point, huh? He nodded, but she didn't see it since her eyes were closed. She let out a long sigh, as if finally relaxing into the bed. He thought she was going back to sleep. That would be nice. Hopefully the doc would be back before she woke. Ian felt a tremor under his feet. He looked down at the floor, but didn't see anything unusual. The tremor increased in intensity. A plastic canister of cotton balls fell off the counter, along with a roll of gauze. Everything shook. The walls began moving. A long crack zigzagged along the ceiling over them, dropping dust particles. Ian dove forward and arched his body over Chandra's. He squeezed his eyes shut as the world around him went to hell. The sounds of things crashing to the floor, glass breaking. More rumbling. The hospital bed jerked back and forth on its wheels. Then a loud smash. A separate vibration, one different from the earthquake's motion. What the hell just happened? He heard shouting as people moved around. The room was suddenly brighter, and he felt heat on his back. He smelled the outdoors mixed with a lot of drywall dust. His eyes popped open. What the heck? They were outside, sorta. He straightened and watched others as they ran or sat on the ground. People rushing out of buildings and homes. He saw the doctor and Quick standing a few feet away. Both gaping. Then Ian's eyes saw the floor, well, more like the walls crumbled onto the floor. The entire room had collapsed around them. And not a single piece hit him. That wasn't possible. Not with the ceiling overhead. Ian turned to Chandra and shook her. Chandra, wake up. We need to get out of here. Chandra. In his fear, his wolf's claws sneaked out and dug into her arm where he grabbed her. Chandra popped awake. OWW, she cried and jerked her arm away. Ian tried to pick her up. She wasn't having any part of that. Put me down now. The shaking stopped and complete silence reigned. No birds in the trees, no grasshoppers or crickets singing out. It felt surreal to Ian. What the hell happened? Chandra said, looking around. Oh shit. The walls fell. How does that happen? She looked ready to run. Ian soothed her. It's okay now. It stopped. We're safe. Behind him, Quick called his name and climbed over the hill of rubble that used to be the outside wall. We're fine, Ian called out. Not hurt at all. Quick stood on the pile and looked around the floor. Yeah, I see that. There's nothing on the ground around you for a couple feet. Ian glanced down to see a circular area surrounding the bed free of debris, as if a dome had been placed over them and everything bounced off that. I would really like to go, Chandra said. Irritation showed in the doctor's voice. Where would you like to go? It's okay, Dr. Brown. She can come to Vivian's with me. We can talk there, Quick said. He called out for Maze, and gave him directions to survey the damage and report back to him at Vivian's. Several injured people were headed toward the clinic. Dr. Brown hurried toward the front door down the hall. Seemed just this room on the end of the building collapsed. The rest of the structure remained sound. Ian, Quick said, great job protecting the patient. I'm proud of you. Ian stood straighter. Thank you, sir. I'll take Ms. Nadas to Vivian's place for the rest of the day. You take a break for a while or help those who need it. He paused. Actually, I would like to start plans for rebuilding the village. Make a list of what needs to be done and get with Chief Earthen to see what they want. With that, he hurried off to see who needed help.
Chapter 11. Quick. Quick watched as Ian walked away. He turned back to Chandra. Well, looks like you and I are on our own. Let's get you over to Vivian's house. Who is she? Chandra asked. She is the owner of the island, he said. Chandra, in a hospital gown, sat up and pulled her legs over the edge of the bed. Guess we'll need to get you some clothes, he said. Vivian can probably help you with that. Quick helped her over the rubble of the walls and onto the grass. The shouts of the people had quieted. Along the way, he saw Vivian helping others toward the medical center. He called out to her. She joined the couple and headed to her bungalow. Vivian reached her hand out to Chandra. "It's nice to meet you, Chandra," she said. "I'm glad everything turned out all right for you." Chandra smiled but remained quiet. There was something about her Quick wasn't sure about. He couldn't say what it was, but his wolf was on edge. Inside Vivian's home, she pulled an outfit from her closet and gave it to Chandra to wear. Then Quick followed her to the kitchen. "Where did she come from?" Vivian whispered. "I don't know her story yet," he said. "But we will find out now." Chandra came into the kitchen and Vivian stood. "How about I make lunch for us?" She pulled sandwich items from the fridge. "Tell us about yourself, Chandra." Quick sat back and let Vivian control the conversation. He only wanted to observe this mysterious woman. "There's not really much to tell. I'm just a normal person from New Orleans who happened to be on a boat that exploded near this island." His wolf sensed something was not right with her answer. That was one thing that mystified Quick. How did someone get through the fog that should have been impenetrable? Were their defenses weakening, in addition to the strange happenings on the island? He needed to discuss this issue with the rest of the team. "What about the rest of the people on the boat? Are they okay?" Vivian asked. Quick smelled the concern and worry the woman was giving off. "I don't know," she said. "Has anybody else come to the island?" Vivian looked at Quick. "I don't think so." "Quick, have you seen anybody?" He shook his head. "Not that I know of. But with the weather we just had, there could be, and we just don't know yet." He was glad he asked Ian to check the island's perimeter. If anyone had washed ashore, he would have noticed. "Now that we know you're okay," Vivian said, "we'll get you some lunch and get you back home." Chandra sat a little straighter in her chair. She seemed a bit panicked. "I would like to stay here. That is, if you don't mind." Quick caught Vivian's eye. She must have sensed the same thing he did. "That would be fine," Vivian said. "It's great to have visitors." She set a plate with a turkey sandwich and chips in front of Chandra. "You're not wearing a ring. I assume you're not married?" "No," Chandra said, "but I do have a boyfriend." Quick's wolf perked up. Something wasn't right about that answer either. Vivian set a plate with 2 sandwiches, pickles, radish bites, and a handful of chips in front of Quick. He looked at their guest. "I know you probably don't want to talk about it, but what can you tell me about what happened to you? You have burns and scratches on your arms." Vivian frowned at him. But he was tired of her beating around the bush and developing a rapport like females did. Men were simple creatures. If they had a question, they flat out asked. Chandra's chin dropped. "Some friends and I were out on the water for a day of fun. I don't know why, but apparently the boat exploded. That's all I remember." Before Vivian could ask another question, Chandra asked her own. "Tell me about Skull Point," she said. Quick snapped his head up and stared at her. Only shifters knew that name. Chandra's eyes widened, and the scent of fear came rolling off her. His wolf picked it up. "That guy Ian said the island is called Skull Point. Is that right?" Quick relaxed. "Yes, it is," Vivian said. Chandra looked like she expected more. "Was that an earthquake?" "I've never experienced one before. Does that happen a lot here?" Quick remembered the collapsed room and how the debris field was away from Ian and her. "I do believe that was an earthquake. Our first one, actually, in a long time. Could have been as long as forever, but he wasn't mentioning that." "Oh," Chandra said and bit into her sandwich. "What do you think caused it?" "Strange question. Whatever causes earthquakes, I think." He leaned in closer to the table. "Do you have any idea why? Did she know something he didn't?" Chandra sat back, startled from his closeness and gruffness. Her hand covered her mouth. No, I don't have a clue about that kind of stuff. Why ask me? He shrugged. Vivian gave him a glaring look. Maybe he was being a bit too suspicious. But that was his job. Vivian said, I'm sure it was a natural thing, and we're lucky to have gotten off as well as we have. We'll worry about it later. He knew she meant talking to that wizened attorney. He thought about going back to the chief and asking his opinion. He'd do that later. As he ate and the women talked, he thought about what he recognized in her scent. With Vivian sitting with them now, he realized what the subtle hints were. He interrupted, Chandra, when were you going to tell us you are a witch? Chapter 12. Quick. Sitting at the kitchen table in Vivian's bungalow, both Chandra and Vivian stared at Quick. He knew he was right. Chandra was a witch. She had that scent witches carried. He wasn't sure what it was exactly, but the woman had it. Now he would take over this conversation and get some answers. A knock came from the front door, and Maze's voice carried it to them. Anybody home? Quick sighed. Of all the moments to arrive, Maze had to pick this one. Vivian stood from the table. We're in the kitchen, Maze. Come on in. The room remained quiet as Maze made his way to them. He came around the corner. Hey guys, he took a deep breath. How about I come back later? He stepped away. Quick snorted. Get in here, Maze. You're already here. Might as well sit and hear this. No, really, Maze said. Quick pointed a finger at him. Chair. Now. Maze complied and schlepped to the table and sat. Give me a quick rundown of the status. Most of the buildings and bungalows are fine. Obviously, the medical center is damaged, as well as the rec room, he replied. Quick gave a nod and looked at Chandra. Well, he asked. She sighed. Yes, I am a witch within the local coven. Why didn't you tell us? Vivian asked. Chandra huffed. When were you going to tell me you're a shifter? Maze smiled. She's got a point. Quick frowned at him. Now you can leave. When Maze stood, Quick pointed to the seat and he plopped back down. Quick crossed his arms. All right, Ms. Natas. This is going to be a completely different conversation now. Chandra sighed and slumped in her chair. Quick asked, Do you know who Vivian is? Before you answer, let me remind you shifters can scent lies and emotions. Chandra narrowed her eyes and pursed her lips. I know that already. And I know who Vivian Devereaux is. The heir of this island. Are you aware of the ties Vivian has to the New Orleans Coven? Quick asked. Her uncle is the head warlock, Chandra spit out. Vivian busted out a laugh, almost sending her bite of sandwich across the table. They all looked at her. Sorry. From what I remember of my uncle, he was far from any warlock. But a definite wannabe. Quick smelled the anger rising in Chandra. He readied himself to pounce if she tried any magic tricks. You should know, Ms. Devereaux, Chandra snapped, that your uncle is the best leader this coven has ever had. Vivian set her sandwich on her plate. I remember the coven being pretty damn happy when I was young. Yeah, and it's better now. There's order, and everyone knows their place, which makes everyone happy with clear-cut duties. We have get-togethers to practice our magic while the kids play outside. Everyone loves Frank. He's the perfect leader, kind-hearted and fair. And he loves the coven. Unlike others who let us pay for their expensive education, then never came back. Vivian came out of her chair. Never came back. Are you kidding? She leaned forward, laying her hands on the table. My precious uncle would have killed me if I came back. He wanted to rule, and took the opportunity from me. Oh, please. Chandra flew to her feet. Frank wouldn't hurt anyone. He loved all his family. He always hopes you'll come back to the family. He even sent private investigators to try to find you. Yeah, Vivian replied. To kill me, not bring me home. Why would Frank want to kill you? Chandra asked. Vivian gaped. Are you serious? When my parents died, I was kicked out of school because my education contract had been canceled by the coven leader. I lived on the streets as a teenager. Fortunately, I was warned not to return because my dear old uncle didn't want the true heir, me, to take his high and mighty crown. That's not true, Chandra said. You refused to return because you were too good for our small coven. Too snooty to come home to our humble group. You wanted to work big magic. Big magic? Vivian said. I can barely do a charm spell. That shut their visitor up. Quick tensed. He wished Vivian wouldn't have given away her weakness. What would Chandra do with this opportunity? If she dared to hurt Vivian? Really, was all Chandra said. Vivian plunked onto her chair. Really? What happened to everything you learned in school? Chandra asked. I told you, Vivian replied. I was kicked out. I never got to the advanced magic classes. Chandra sat quietly and took another bite of her sandwich. After a minute of strained silence, she said, I can show how to do some things if you want. I'm not bad myself. Quick's brows came up. He wasn't expecting that. Vivian desperately needed someone to train her. Was this the best choice? Maybe not the best, but maybe good for now. Vivian looked at him, silently asking what he thought of the proposition. His only worry was how Chandra felt about Vivian owning the island. Did the witch think Frank should have it? Chandra, Quick asked, do you think this island should belong to Frank? She frowned with the last bite of her sandwich. Why would he want it? He's got the coven. If he wanted to go to an island, he'd go to the Bahamas where the weather is nicer. Chandra pushed the plate away. Thank you for lunch, Ms. Devereaux. May I use your bathroom? Sure, Vivian said. Use the one in my room where you change clothes. Quick watched her leave. Vivian slapped her hand on the table. My bastard uncle has told lies about me to everyone. I can't believe it. Well, yes, I can. He's such an asshole. Mom never liked him. I know. Calm down. Quick put his hand over hers. He didn't need her all riled up. I think you should take her up on the offer to learn, he said. You think so? She pulled her bottom lip between her teeth. I think this is a great opportunity to learn about your uncle and the coven, and maybe some of his weaknesses, Quick answered. I'd still be more comfortable with Mr. Wizen showing me the ropes, Vivian said. Is it okay if we ask him to come out here? As in soon. We can ask him about the strange events too. Maybe he knows something. More than we do. May scooted his chair back. I'll go to the mainland and get him. Not a problem. Vivian nodded. I'd appreciate that. I'll leave shortly. Maze looked at Quick for approval. Quick nodded. Chandra came back into the kitchen. We ready to get started on the training?
Chapter 13. Vivian. After the men left and the kitchen was cleaned up from lunch, Vivian hesitantly agreed to learn what she could from Chandra. Vivian was nervous. She felt the walls closing in, ready to smother her. Let's do this outside, she said, and headed to the back porch. The day was gorgeous as it always was, except for what they'd witnessed this morning. Maybe all that was why she felt anxious. But none of it was her fault, was it? She didn't do anything. Hadn't even tried. Chandra frowned at her. Vivian, whatever you have going through your mind, you need to put aside. You're giving off strong negative vibes. Counterproductive. Vivian took a deep breath and let it out. You're right. I need to chill. Being out here for a few minutes will help. Chandra looked around. I see what they mean when they call it paradise. Vivian was curious to know who they were, but that would sidetrack them and she didn't have time for that. She could feel time running out, but what that meant she didn't know. She wanted this to succeed. She tested the rattan chairs that had been put back on her porch after the windstorm. They seemed sturdy, nothing looked broken. As they sat, Vivian asked, "What are we going to start with?" "You know the basics, right?" Chandra asked. Vivian wasn't even sure of that anymore. "Maybe, but let's review," Vivian said. Chandra looked at her as if asking, "Really? This is the best way I know how to describe magic. It's an energy field created of all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us, binds the world together." "Yeah, right." Chandra shrugged. "Let's practice spells in the yard," Chandra said. "They're easier to do when standing and focusing, and I'd like to get some sun too." Vivian followed her down the 2 porch steps to the grass. As they moved away from the bungalow, a group of the old villagers walked into the yard. Vivian recognized Chief Earthen. He bowed his head slightly when he greeted her. "Vivian, it is good to see you again. We are here to watch over your training." "Oh," she said. This was strange and she wasn't sure she welcomed it. She didn't want to show them how bad she was. They might kick her off the island for being inadequate. "No worries," he assured her. "We know and understand." That didn't convince her very much. But the chief sat on the grass between 2 others. Vivian noticed the elders had gathered in a circle around where she and Chandra stood. Chills ran down her back. The circle was a sacred symbol to the witches, even she knew that. It was used as a barrier to keep something out, or in. Which was it, she wondered. Chandra frowned and even glared at the chief. He smiled at her and gave a slight nod. "Fine," Chandra said, "let's get on with this." She squared her feet and shoulders and tipped her chin up. "First get yourself centered," she said. "You can't do anything if you're flummoxed." Vivian followed suit, sucking in a deep breath and letting it out. Instantly, she felt the air vibrate and tingle around her skin. She felt surrounded, protected. From the circle, one of the men began chanting under his breath. 3 others joined in. Interesting that the 4 sat facing the cardinal directions. The chief looked to the sun, the rays in his eyes as he squinted. Chandra grabbed Vivian's arm. "What are they saying? I don't like this." Vivian held her tongue and gazed at the men. She trusted these people, as they were as ancient as the island, it seemed. She was the guest here, and didn't want to be rude to those who were native to the island. "I don't know what they're saying. Probably a little prayer to help me with this magic stuff. Goodness knows I need it," Vivian replied. The men quieted down, and Chandra moved her focus back to Vivian. "Okay, let's finally get started," the witch said. "First we'll move objects." Vivian could already do a bit of physical manipulation. She'd taken control of Riss's gun when she visited the island not too long ago. But it had taken a lot to do that. This task worried her. Could she do it? Chandra reached out a hand toward the porch, and a chair lifted into the air like an invisible person had picked it up. After allowing it to softly land, Chandra turned to Vivian. "Do the same thing," she said. Vivian balked. "How?" "I don't." Chandra rolled her eyes. "Just let the magic flow through you, and tell the chair to float up." "Right. Like it was that easy." Vivian had never felt magic flow through her. She stretched out a hand anyway, and visualized the chair hovering over the ground. Nothing happened, but there was the sound of clothes rustling to her side. Vivian focused harder, tunneling her vision on the chair at the table. The chair would hover. Positive thinking. On the same side that the clothes had made a sound, now came a short cry. Worry filled her. What was happening over there? Concentration broken, she turned to see one of the younger men that was sitting in the circle, now plummeting to the ground. Her jaw dropped. Instead of the chair lifting off the ground, Vivian had hovered the guy. Vivian whipped around to Chandra. "I did it." Chandra and the chief elder frowned. Chandra replied, "Kinda but not really." "Okay," Chandra said, "now let's teleport." Instantly an apple appeared in her hand. "This is from your kitchen." Chandra eyed her. "Remember the basic rule of transporting. The object has to already exist to port it. That was good to know. Vivian was sure that if she'd been allowed to stay in school, she would have learned that rule. But as it was, in her mind's eye, she saw the bunch of bananas on her counter in the kitchen. She visualized one showing up in her hand. And visualized and visualized. With disgust, Vivian dropped her hand. I can't do this. It's hopeless. I've lost my magic. The men around them started a whispery mumble among themselves. Were they getting mad and deciding to vote her off? Keep trying, Chandra encouraged. There's got to be something. You give off a witchy vibe. Vivian held out her hand and told the banana to get there now. To her surprise, the banana showed up, but it was squished with all the insides pushed out. The men laughed. She threw it down, wanting to stomp on it. But what was the point? It was already mush. Chandra stared at the yellow mess on the ground. That's okay. Let's try something else. The elder in the group stood. No, we have seen enough. Vivian gasped. What did that mean? Was she fired? Could he do that? But the lawyers in town told her she owned the island. Could they still kick her off and find someone else with more power? Like Chandra? Vivian turned to see Chandra bowing to the old man at the head of the circle. A devious smile played on her lips.
Chapter 14. Quick. Quick opened the door to Sarah's restaurant on the mainland, Maze behind him. Concern had etched itself into his mind. So many things had happened already today, and it wasn't near over. Hopefully, the meeting with the attorneys would shed light on something. Ever since Adriana passed away, life on the island had become strange. He had no explanation, except that she must have used more magic than he knew, to keep things flowing smoothly. Inside the eatery, a large group sat at a table. The aroma of gumbo and shrimp made his stomach growl. Maze quick, a familiar voice said. Among those at the table, Rissa Belgrande jumped up and hurried to Maze. She wrapped her arms around his neck. A thunk sound from the group turned his head. Sarah had set down 2 bowls of gumbo at the table. Maze whispered into Rissa's ear. Quick cleared his throat loudly. Maze and I are here. Hearing his name, Maze looked up. Quick nodded to Rissa. Officer Belgrande, how nice to see you again. She pulled away from Maze. It's Detective Belgrande. Oh, I guess I forgot. Quick gave her a friendly wink. She scoffed at him, then took Maze's hand. The 3 sat around the table, joining the trio of lawyers and restaurant owner Sarah. We were just saying, Rissa said, Frank Bonaparte is still running the casino. Guess he didn't take the hint. Mr. Wizen replied, Don't worry about that. We are keeping a close eye on him. Maze sheepishly raised his hand. I'd like to get a glimpse of him. That way, I can keep an eye out for him. That's a great idea, Rissa said. We can do that after eating. Quick set his spoon in his now empty bowl. I'd like to leave as soon as possible after this. We've got a lot going on with building new housing for the native islanders. New housing? Anne said. What happened to their old huts? Quick sighed. A tsunami wiped out that part of the island. Did a lot of damage. Mr. Wizen choked on his sip of soup. That's impossible. The magic prevents the island from falling victim to such things. Exactly right, Attorney Tom Whitmore added. Never has anything harmful bothered the island. It's the magic. Quick sighed again. That's why we're here. To find answers. And solutions, if possible. Before Wizen could say anything, Maze butted in. Y'all okay if Rissa and I head to the casino to see about getting Frank Bonaparte sent? Quick raised a brow, but Maze leaving really didn't matter. As head of security and Adriana's adopted son, Quick knew more about the island than Maze. Adriana told him a lot about the magic she wielded. But apparently not enough. Yeah, go on. I'll catch you up later, Quick said. With that, Maze and Rissa headed on out. Anne asked, "How much damage is there on the island?" "Besides the native islanders' village, a lot of trees are down. There was some damage, but nothing that can't be repaired relatively quickly," Quick said. "The men are fixing up the apartments as we speak." Quick watched as Wizen sat deep in thought. Could all these strange happenings be coincidental to Vivian's aunt passing? Doubtful. He'd learned in his years that coincidences didn't just happen. "Tom," Mr. Wizen said, leaning forward against the table, "would you please tell Quick all we know about the island?" With that, Wizen stood and disappeared down the hallway connecting the law offices and restaurant. Everyone at the table turned to Whitmore. He cleared his throat. Quick guessed this man probably didn't do a lot of work in the courtroom. He seemed more the research side of things. "Yes," he started, "the island." He cleared his throat again. "The island is magical in most aspects." "Whoa, right there," Quick jumped in. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that the island was created with magic, in a magic realm by a magic person." Not really the explanation he was hoping for, but it'd do for now. As we understand it, the island is a living entity on its own. It's filled with magic as witches and wizards are. Quick did a double take. Like it's alive. How can an island be alive? Tom and Anne raised brows. "Not exactly, but it's magic," Anne replied. "We don't question it. We're not sure where it originates, but the power runs through everything. Even the people." Got it. Quick realized magic's definition wouldn't fit nicely into a box. So much for hoping this would be easy to understand. So the chief and his village crew are witches. Tom and Anne shared a look. Not exactly, but sort of. Damn it. He didn't like their glances. They weren't telling him something. He didn't sense any lies, though. What the hell was going on? Anne continued. "With Adriana gone, it becomes Vivian's responsibility to maintain the balance." Quick was starting to think he didn't know a damn thing about anything. What balance? Between what? "Between the good and the bad, the light and the dark forces," Tom answered. Just great, he thought. Vivian didn't like using her magic, and she kept saying she didn't have any magic, if that was possible for a witch. Vivian and the island are connected in a way that they feed off each other. They share the magic more or less, Anne finished. A chill ran up his spine. What if Vivian can't use her magic? What if she has none? The two lawyers laughed. "There's no worry about that, Quick. She is a witch and very powerful being of the Devereaux line." "Okay, I get that. But what if?" Quick cringed, waiting for the answer he knew was coming. "Simply put," Tom said, "the island would die."
Chapter 15. Rissa. Walking down the sidewalk toward the casino, Rissa's insides were doing flips. She'd missed Maze so much in the time since the warehouse bust. Funny, how quickly someone could attach to another. Had he thought about her while on the island? No way was she asking him. If he said no, awkward. Fortunately, she had a real excuse to be close to him. "So, you gonna teach me more about the wolf thing inside me?" Maze stopped. "I'm so sorry." He took her hands in his. "With so much going on with the island, I'd forgotten I was to help you develop your war skills." Maze pulled her into an alley where a couple cars had parked. He pressed her against the old brick wall with his body, and she melted into him. His lips covered hers. Rissa locked her arms around his neck, wanting to protest when he pulled back a little. Resting his forehead on hers, locked gazes with her.
"Missed you," Maze said.
Her cheeks flushed. "Same." After a long silence, one she didn't want to disrupt but realized she had to, she grabbed his hand and tugged him forward. "Let's go. Get this done so you can come back to Quick. I don't want to upset your boss." Maze sighed. "Yeah, let's get this over with." On the sidewalk, a woman with strawberry hair locked eyes with Rissa and lifted her lip as if disgusted. What the hell was her problem? Rissa wanted to knock shoulders with her when she passed, but at the last second, Maze yanked Rissa toward him. "Hey," she said, looking up at him, "why did you do that?" "Really? You're asking me why?" Maze seemed incredulous. "We don't have time for a knockdown drag-out wolf versus witch fight." Rissa glanced back. "That was a witch." "Yes, it was, and I don't need you turned into a turtle or something," Maze said. "Shit," Rissa hissed. They stood outside the casino, waiting for those leaving to clear the entrance. He held the door for her. Stopping at the main door to the office, Maze grabbed the doorknob. The perky blonde at the front desk flashed the most fake smile Rissa had ever seen. In return, Rissa didn't even attempt to be nice. Instead, she pulled her badge from her pocket. "Detective Rissa Belgrande. NOLA PD. Here to see Mr. Bonaparte." The girl pushed a button and spoke into her headset mic. A moment later, she pulled the mic from her head. "I'll walk you back to his office." Rissa turned to the side door. "No thanks. Just let us in. We know where Frank's office is." After hearing a buzz, she pulled the door open. "Let's introduce you to that bastard Frank Bonaparte." Without knocking, Rissa walked inside the corner office. Frank Bonaparte sat behind a huge Brazilian wood desk. He was hanging up the phone. "Good day, Detective Belgrande. What can I do for you?" he asked. Rissa strolled to the stiff chairs in front of the desk and made herself comfortable. "Please come in," Frank said with a frown. Maze took the seat next to her. When he inhaled deeply, Frank glared at him, his eyes narrowed. "Any reason you have a dog with you, Officer Belgrande?" She ignored the comment. "We're just stopping by to see if anything new has come to mind on your partners." "Ex-partner," Frank corrected. "Of course," Rissa replied, "ex-partner's records." Frank steepled his finger and set his elbows on the desk. "I'm sorry. Nothing has come to mind." Rissa noticed scratches and burns on his hands and wrist. Studying his face closer, she spied more abrasions. "Oh," she continued, "you are also aware that Quick Alvarez's name has been cleared of any wrongdoing. The courts have exonerated him. Which means no bounty will be paid and all hunters have to go the hell away," Maze added. Frank frowned. "Well said, dog." "This dog," Maze said, standing and placing his hands on the desk, "can tear your throat out before you could mutter one word of a spell."
Chapter 16. Maze. Maze was ready to spit fire, if only werewolves had that ability. His animal snarled to get out and show this prick who the damn dog was. He took a deep breath. "Fellas," Rissa said, "let's stay professional." She tugged on his shirt to get him away from the desk. Before sitting, his eyes scanned the wood top, looking for anything that resembled a weapon. Nothing looked deadly, but a framed photo did catch his eye. In it, a pretty woman sat on Bonaparte's lap, her arms around his shoulders. Someone actually liked this man. She looked familiar, but his quick glance wasn't enough for him to get a full look at her. He sat in the chair next to Rissa's, propping his elbows on the sides of the chair. While Rissa asked him another question, Maze studied the man and his sense. Frank wasn't scared or worried about anything. So it was unlikely he was hiding something. On the man's fingers, skin was burned and the back of his hands were scratched. "Been in an accident recently?" he asked Frank, nodding at his hands. Frank sat back in leather executive chair, hands now out of sight behind the desk. "No, I've been working in the compound. We're constructing a new building. Handling and cutting wood." Frank glanced at his watch. "Have you eaten, Detective?" Bonaparte asked. "Perhaps we can talk over Chinese." Rissa shook her head. "How about we visit our main buffet in the casino?" He sneered at Maze. "I'll invite the Dew-Wolf also." Rissa rubbed her nose. Maze wondered if she picked up the scent that was hitting him too. "Can I offer either of you a drink? It is warm out." Before he or Rissa responded, Bonaparte pushed a button on his desk. "Celine, would you please bring in 3 bottled waters?" Rissa stood. "Thank you, but we're not." Bonaparte pushed up from his chair. "It's not a problem, really." He came around the desk and reached out a hand to touch Rissa. A growl erupted from Maze's mouth before he could contain it. Bonaparte froze, arm hovering, then he stepped back and raised his hands into the air. I apologize. I meant no harm. He backed to the other side of the desk. I merely wanted to invite the detective to our facility. Maze slid in front of Rissa. Yeah, that's not happening in this lifetime. There was that scent again. Not worry or concern exactly. A twinge in his stomach acted up. Something wasn't right. His instinct said it was time to leave. Shall we go? Rissa stared at him with questioning eyes. Sure, she replied. Maze tried not to push her out the door in his desire to get out, to get moving. Again, he felt something wasn't right. Then it clicked. The woman in the photo who sat on Bonaparte's lap certainly was familiar. They had rescued her from the ocean not too long ago.
Chapter 17. Rissa. Who is this Chandra chick? Rissa asked as she and Maze hurried along the sidewalk toward the cafe and her car. I don't know. One of the guys pulled her from the ocean, Maze replied. What was she doing? Rissa asked. That made no sense. Did the storm sink her boat? I'm beginning to wonder. If she's related to Bonaparte somehow, then there's more there than she's telling, Maze answered. What's the plan now? Rissa asked. He sighed. We'll figure it out when I get back. Quick, we'll be waiting. First thing we need to do is question Chandra. What can I do on this end? Maze was quiet. If he told her she couldn't help, she wouldn't be happy. Do you know much about the witch coven who rules the town? He asked. Not much, she said. We've never had any calls to go out there, that I know of anyway. From the outside the gated entrance, it looks beautiful with all the fancy landscaping and big houses. Did you know Frank Bonaparte is head witch or whatever they call him? Head prick maybe, Maze joked. She smiled. Yeah. Learned that somewhere down the line. Isn't Vivian related to him? Maze grunted. Have you given any thought about coming to the island? They were almost back to the dock. Had she given thought? That's all she could focus on for days. When she was called into the chief's office, she was sure they were going to fire her, instead of promoting her. In the end, she was still undecided. What if she and Maze had any kind of falling out? Things would get really awkward, really fast. And being on an island, there wasn't a lot of space for them to keep from seeing each other. I need to go, he said, giving her a kiss. Quick is probably losing it, pacing the boat. If he hasn't left already. Yeah, I'll see you around, she said. Count on it, he replied, watching Maze at the entrance of the marina parking lot. A black van skidded to a stop directly behind Maze, and men jumped out, one with his hands out as if casting a spell. Maze looked back, his body stiffened and he fell over. The men hauled him into the van and it screeched away.
Chapter 18. Quick. Quick was going to kill Maze. He shouldn't have left with the boat, leaving him behind. To quell some of his impatience, he pulled up the white buoys hanging over the side of the boat. I'm sure Maze is on his way, Wizen said. He just called minutes ago. Quick is right to worry, Sarah said. Chandra isn't someone to mess with. She's very powerful. I remember her in the coven when she was younger, Wizen said. I've stayed away since Frank took over. Why's that? Quick asked Wizen. For starters, the man is a tyrant. Secondly, he paused, I believe the death of Vivian's parents wasn't an accident. Quick froze. What do you think happened then? Wizen glanced at Sarah and she looked away. I'll wait on the dock for Maze. Hurry him up when he gets here. She climbed from the boat and walked up the planks toward the front of the pier. Quick watched her go. What's going on? Why is she leaving? Sarah is a powerful witch herself and still associates with the upper echelons. Though, I don't think she's been to the coven's community in over a year or two. It's better for her to have deniability when it comes to some things. Okay, whatever. Quick turned back to the attorney. What about Vivian's parents? Wizen took a seat on the padded bench along the side of the hull. It's not a situation I can present any evidence against. The crash site was conveniently cleaned up before much investigation could be done. Police called it accidental and never made a case of it. What happened? Quick asked. It was night. Vivian's parents were driving back to the compound from dinner in town. Frank, Vivian's uncle, informed everyone that the Coven heads had been killed in an accident and he was taking over. No one raised any questions or wanted to look at the crash site. Quick couldn't believe no one went against what they were told. It was quite a shock, and by the time we recovered our senses, the bodies had been cremated and the car demolished and sent to a junkyard. Wizen shook his head. So what makes you think it wasn't an accident? Wizen shrugged. It is a combination of a few things. The lack of emotions on Frank's part. It was like he was prepared and quickly had the Coven running as he saw fit. He'd always been power-hungry, and I wouldn't put it past him to do something to give himself leadership. Plus the crash site itself. What about it? After pestering the police, they finally gave me the location of the scene. The road was not on their way home from town. Why they were on it is a mystery. One of my innate abilities, as a witch, is being able to see glimpses of the past when handling objects. When I laid a hand on the roadway, I received immediate mental images of two vehicles side by side on the two-lane road. A dark-colored car was ramming a cream vehicle, which looked like her parents' car, shoving it off the road and into a tree. Damn. His heart ached for Vivian. They shared one thing in losing parents. Something he wished neither of them had to suffer. Is it safe to come back? Sarah called out from mid-dock. Yes, Wizen replied as he waved her back. I'm getting worried quick, Sarah said. The longer we wait, the more damage Chandra could be causing. And with Vivian having no power to fight Chandra. A whistle cut through the air from the parking lot. Maze waved. It's about time, Quick mumbled and headed toward the steering console. When he heard a screech of tires, he lifted his head in time to see Maze fall to the ground and his body thrown into the van. Quick's wolf jumped forward in its need to protect. But before he could do anything, the van was gone. If he chased after them, they would be out of range before he even got to the road. Now he had to choose. His best friend, practically brother, the island that had protected shifters for hundreds of years. Put that way, he had little choice. He turned the key for the boat's engine and sped through the no-wake zone. Wizen put his hand on Quick's arm. We need to save the island. Quick grimaced. He didn't like this one damn bit. No choice, Wizen insisted. Maze can take care of himself. You have to have faith in that. Quick started the boat forward and glanced at Sarah. Can you overpower Chandra if needed? She nodded. With Gerald here, she gestured toward Wizen, we can take her with no problem. That would pacify him for now, he uttered. What kind of damage could this woman do? Sarah glanced at Wizen before answering, pretty much anything she wants.
Chapter 19. Vivian. Vivian didn't appreciate the snide look Chandra gave her. Vivian knew her powers were non-existent, but that didn't mean the woman had to be shitty about it. The sound of a racing boat motor grabbed Vivian's attention. Quick was back. Maybe now they could get answers and figure out what was going on with all the island's craziness. She stepped toward the chief, sitting in a circle on the ground with the 12 others. He rose and pivoted with her to head down to the docks. After a few steps, she realized she wasn't being a polite hostess, turned back to ask Chandra if she wanted to come down. Her words stuck in her throat. Chandra stood face to face with the chieftain. Neither spoke or moved. Just a silent standoff. Chandra? You want to come down too? The chief's deep scratchy voice filled the air. She will remain in the circle. Chandra stepped away from the elder, her hands in fists. Don't think for 1 minute that you can stop me from using my powers, old man, she growled. Vivian was confused. Was Chandra threatening to do something? She seemed so nice, helping her with her magic. Chandra stood in the center of the circle with 13 and raised her arms, chanting. The group of men did the same, sounding like a monk choral concert. Chandra knelt, putting her hand on the ground. A tremble shook the earth Vivian stood on. She noticed the individual blades of grass were turning brown and folding in on themselves. Those single strands soon became a small patch. Leaves on trees around her had their color sucked from them and fell to the ground. Shit. She was draining the island of its life? Could that even be done? Chandra, stop. Vivian spun around. Wizen and Sarah, both with hands extended, hurried up the slope from the dock. Quick was close behind. Chandra screeched, and the browning of the flora stopped, as well as the tremor. But the grass remained dead. Brilliant idea to contain her in a circle of 13, Wizen said. The men couldn't stop her completely, but they sure slowed her down. All right, Vivian said. She hadn't initiated the circle. The men showed up when she and Chandra stepped outside to practice magic. Had the native islanders sensed or known Chandra's? That's why they were there. Did the islanders have magic also? Chandra's gaze lifted from the chief to Wizen. Great. Gerald Wizen. What a privilege for you to show up just in time to watch me take over the island. There's no way we'll let you do that, Sarah commented. Shut up, bitch. Chandra turned to Anne. You won't be able to stop me after I get Frank here. There's no way that will happen either, Wizen replied. We'll see about that. Chandra crossed her arms over her chest and turned away from the group. I am so glad you are here, Vivian said and hugged Anne and Gerald. What's going on here? Quick asked. Vivian frowned. Chandra offered to help me learn to use my magic, so we came out here. Then the guys showed up at the same time and sat down in a circle around us. I wasn't sure if they were creating a protective circle. I thought they wanted to watch to see how bad I was, so they could kick me off the island. Gerald Wizen laughed. Vivian, this isn't some reality game show. This is your life and you won't be kicked off by anyone. She shrugged. I know. I just don't feel worthy. You're not, Chandra shouted. Glad someone here realizes that. The island should go to Frank. He's the rightful heir. Vivian spun around. Rightful heir? She stomped toward Chandra. Let me tell you about the rightful heir. Innate magic flows in a witch's blood. It's passed down generation by generation. No two families' magic is the same. Great power comes from training and practice. Chandra sneered. Magic 101. Glad you learned something at your prissy school for overindulged princesses. And there's more, Vivian said. My mother told me the Devereaux line of witches went back hundreds of years. She even had stories of pirates and treasure she told me at bedtime. Yeah? So what? Chandra spit out. Some other lines can trace that far back. Back to the blood. The longer the line, the stronger the innate magic, the more potential for great power, Vivian continued. Which is why I'm with your uncle, Chandra said. I'm not stupid. With him, I will rule the coven. Together, we have more power than any other witch in the compound. They will all bow to us, as will those on this island when we take it. Vivian's cocked a brow. You and Uncle Frank? You're so sure about that? As you said, the Devereaux line goes way back. Frank is perfectly made for the position. Vivian couldn't help but smirk. My mama also told me something else. Chandra looked at her with disgust. Just spit it out. I don't have all day. Vivian laughed. Chandra was wrong. She did have all day. She wasn't going anywhere, especially after Vivian let her bomb drop. Mom said my Uncle Frank isn't a Devereaux. He was adopted. Chandra's eyes widened then quickly narrowed. You lie. Quick, Vivian called out. Yes? Do you sense a lie on me? Sure don't. Chandra scoffed. Like I'm going to believe him. Vivian shrugged. Don't care. Truth is truth. Chandra squatted and put her hand on the ground. Well, watch the truth as I drain this island of its magic. Only the island holder can stop me. And you're so pathetic. Nothing happened. No shaking ground or dying plants. Damn it, Chandra said. Your voodoo shamans have this circle shut down. But they can't stay here forever. Gerald Wizen stepped up to the ring. In his hand he conjured a clear container of sugar. The villager moved aside for him to enter. You are correct, young lady. But the men can't stay here forever. But they don't need to. Chandra eyed the container. What's in there? Salt? She threw her hands up to cast. Wizen was on her in a blink. He grabbed her arm and they both froze for a second. His eyes were locked on hers. Vivian wanted this day to end already. What's he doing? She asked Anne. Anne indicated Wizen with a nod. When Vivian looked back, Wizen was talking to the chief and the circle had broken up. The two men shook hands, and the native islanders entered the forest the same place they exited earlier. Chandra was sitting on the ground, her hands bound inside the container Wizen had. What did you do with the salt? She asked him. Salt is the universal enemy to magic, Wizen said. With Chandra's hands buried in the substance, she can't cast any magic or enchantments. She's rendered harmless for the most part. Bastard, Chandra yelled, wait until Frank gets here. Oh yes, Wizen said, is there a place we can sit? I have the answer to the tsunami problem from this morning. My porch, Vivian said and led the group of 4 toward her bungalow. Anne looked around the area. This morning was rough on the island. Quick, the damage is more than you let on. He ran a hand through his hair. I was trying to make the best of it. Seeing it now in full light, you're right. We have a lot of work to do to repair everything. They each took a seat at the patio table, except Quick. If you don't mind, I'm going back to the mainland to find Maze, Quick said. Gerald looked up. Please, Quick. If you could give me 2 minutes. You'll want to know this before leaving. Vivian looked around. She hadn't even noticed Maze wasn't there. Where's Maze? She asked. Don't worry about him, Quick said. He's my responsibility. You need to focus on the island. Oh, she said, a little put out. I guess I'll make some lemonade. Be right back. Sarah pushed an angry Chandra into a chair, then said, let me take care of that. With a twirl of her hand, tall glasses filled with ice and yellow liquid appeared on the table. The damn things even had mini umbrellas in them. Vivian couldn't wait to learn all Sarah could do. She'd probably gain 20 pounds if she could conjure cookies all day. Anne lifted her glass and said, Quick, I'd like to go back with you. Tom is the only one at the office. She turned to Wizen. Gerald, please bring us up to speed. What I saw when I grabbed the young lady's arm is disturbing. I'm afraid we'll finally have to take action against the coven, Wizen began. If you noticed her hands earlier, she had scratches and some burns on her arm. That piece of wood you found her on was from a destroyed boat. Seems she, Frank and others from the coven tried to break through the dimension barrier. Something backfired and the boat exploded. I suspect some of the black magic got through, along with the young lady, and caused havoc on this side. He turned to Chandra in the chair in the corner of the deck. Is that close to the truth, miss? I don't know what you're talking about, she replied. Quick took a deep breath, clearly testing her scent. She's lying. Wizen swiveled back to the table. We are quite fortunate they failed. Without Vivian having her magic, and all the power Frank, Devereaux bloodline or not, and the other witches carried, the island would have fallen into their hands. Vivian slumped in her chair. I'm sorry. Quick put a hand on her knee. For what? For being inadequate. Being weak and useless. Wizen laid a hand on the table. I was not meaning any rudeness to you, Vivian. No. You just stated the truth. Vivian got up from her chair. Chandra is right. I don't deserve this island. I don't feel the magic. The force is not flowing through me. It never has. She swallowed a sob. I'm useless. She hurried off the deck, across the lawn, and into the woods. Tears streamed down her face. What was Adriana thinking, leaving the island to her? Rich soil, and the proper critter life to recycle refuse and keep it clean. Despite the storm, the island was still a paradise. As she stepped into the cave leading to the magical spot where the veil was weak, she felt the floor beneath her give way. What was happening? She fell through the air. This didn't feel like the way to her aunt. Had the damage to the island messed with its magic? Where would she land? Would she?
Chapter 20. Rissa. With white knuckles, Rissa gripped the steering wheel of her car. This wasn't the first time she'd followed a bad guy, but it was the first time saving someone she felt this way for. Yup, she could admit it. No going back. No defaulting on what was in her heart. So losing him here and now scared her to death. Taking a deep breath, Rissa forced the analytical cop side of her brain take over. Much safer than having the emotional side in charge. What could possibly be a motive for abducting Maze? What could he be used or exchanged for? Is the fact he was a shifter important? Or was he simply at the wrong place at the wrong time? Nope, she didn't believe in coincidences, same as Maze said earlier. There was a purpose to everything under the sun. She just needed to figure out what that purpose was. Preferably before he was hurt or worse. The van made a turn, taking them to the outskirts of the city. Were they leaving town? If so, that might rule out gang involvement. She remembered how the men approached with their hands cast forward, then Maze stiffened and fell to the ground and stopped at the gated entrance to the witch's compound. No button pad was stationed near the gate, so it was either remote control or magically opened. Probably the latter. Rissa parked in the back section of the stop-end shop on the corner. From there, she could see anyone coming or going. How was she to get inside? Most obvious way was to wait behind the bushes for someone to go through. Looking around for anyone who might be watching her, she crossed the street and followed the sidewalk, which happened to stop at the fence line of their community. Guess they didn't want others walking in front of their place. Real friendly bunch. Sliding to her knees, she scooted sideways along the red brick exterior, to fully engulf herself in the leafy large plants bordering the fence. And the damn things were prickly as shit. When the gate clanged, signaling it was opening, she crawled to the far edge in time to see a car pull out. She waited until the car was out of sight, then eased herself in before the iron bar barrier closed completely. Ducking beside the last car in a row of parked vehicles, she took a second to catch her breath and look around. What she saw amazed her. The beautiful landscaping and big houses she saw on the outside no longer existed. Instead, the compound was a godforsaken complex you'd expect to see a cult leader run. No grass. Everything was dirt, gravel, or concrete. The few trees were sparse and sickly looking except in an area in front of the main warehouse structure. And the gorgeous houses she used to drool over when driving past. Not one to be seen. The entire place was hidden behind magical glamour. A chill ran up her back. Something told her this wasn't going to be a typical search and rescue. In a lovely community, but a prison. No surprising that no one was walking around. She wouldn't want to be outside in this place either. Standing, Rissa tugged on her jacket and walked like she belonged there. She aimed for the clump of trees outside the warehouse. Playground noises had made their way to her. Maybe that's where everyone was. When she reached the first tall elm, Rissa slid to the side away from the activity. Peeking around the trunk, she spied a couple kids throwing a basketball at a naked hoop bent down at an angle. The court looked like it may have been made of concrete a long time ago. Now, only patches of the cement lay surrounded by weeds and dirt. Two boys jockeyed for position under the backboard. Neither child looked overly fed or dressed in the latest fashion. The ball ricocheted off the hoop, bouncing her direction. She stepped away from the tree and stopped it with her foot. When the boy saw her, he slowed but didn't stop. Rissa scooped up the ball, waiting for the boy to come closer. Hey. She picked up the ball. Hey. You live here? She asked. Yeah, all my life. You like it? The boy shrugged a shoulder. It's okay. She tossed it to him. You got a name? He looked at her, as if debating whether to tell her. Karsten. Good to meet you, Karsten. I'm Rissa. Did you see a van go by? The boy turned his head to look at a building next to the warehouse. Maybe. A door closing caught their attention. A woman with the same color hair as his stepped out, staring at them. Gotta go. He ran back onto the destroyed court to the woman. They talked for a moment. When the lady looked up at Rissa, she noted the fear and worry in the mother's face. The two went into the same building the woman came out of. So much for getting any help. Staying to the shadows, she made her way to the building. Like everything else there, the structure's siding was in need of paint and several repairs. Rissa snuck up to a side door and turned the knob. She wondered how paranoid these people were. When the door opened easily, she decided they were not worried about anyone coming in. Either the witches weren't curious, or they were beaten into submission. For the boy's sake, she hoped it wasn't the latter. The front section of the building was like a garage where the black van was parked. The boy was right about the vehicle being here. The space also stored lots of boxes and plastic containers, the kind she kept her Christmas decorations in. A howl full of pain coming from somewhere within the building wrenched her heart. Out of habit, she pulled her gun and slinked into the back rooms. Following the anguish cries, Rissa hurried down the hall, bypassing closed doors to an open area with concrete floors and cinderblock walls. There in the middle, Maze writhed on the floor. One wizard shot electricity from his hands, sparking and fizzing into Maze's body. He couldn't escape it. The smell of burning flesh and hair almost took her to her knees. The other wizard swished his hands in the air. A deep gash sliced through Maze's clothes and skin. It was like he was cutting Maze with an invisible sword. Blood covered the floor, some burnt to the scorched concrete. Maze rolled around, trying to find a place to hide or some relief from the onslaught of the torture. There was none. The bastards laughed as they taunted. Maze caught her eye from the back of the room. She read his agonizing physical pain, but she also saw the fear he had for her safety. He probably would have gladly taken all the beating if it meant to keep her safe and away from there. She gave him a wink, letting him know she could handle this. Before the next heartbeat, the two wizards lay dead on the floor, half their skulls blown off. Rissa slid to a stop on her knees by Maze's side. Blood soaked everything. His shirt and pants hung on him by strands not ripped. You have to shift now, Rissa said, tearing away the remainder of shirt. He lay motionless except for his gasping and heaving for air. Maze? She snapped fingers in front of his eyes. You with me? She placed her hands on his cheeks. He was so hot. Oh shit. What if his inside were cooked by the electrical shocks? What if his brain was fried, literally? She locked eyes with him. You need to listen to me and do what I say, she said. Do you hear me? Right now you need to heal, which means shifting. That's what you told me before, yes? The body renews itself when shifting. His head barely moved in a nod. Okay, she continued, let's get the show on the road here. We're in the witch's compound, and they aren't too friendly. If we're going to keep us safe, then you need to shift so we can get out of here. Maze's body folded in on itself, and the snap of bones and sinew startled her. She'd never seen a shift close-up. It looked painful enough that she never wanted to try it on her own. She didn't think she had enough shifter in her blood to do it anyway. A moment later, a furry wolf lay on its side panting. Shreds of clothing were strewn about the floor. She rubbed her hand along his muzzle and over his ear. Can you do this? She asked, though she didn't know why. It wasn't like he was going to answer her. In wolf form, Maze rolled to his feet and lowered to his haunches, a menacing growl coming from his chest. What? Rissa said while turning in the direction the wolf looked. Leaning against the doorframe in the back of the room, Frank had his arms crossed in front of his chest. "Welcome to our humble abode," he said. His smile dropped. "Let's get down to business. I have bodies to bury."
Chapter 21. Vivian. As Vivian fell through the air in the island's cave of souls, she knew something wasn't right. It didn't feel the same. Plus, she'd been falling too long. On her previous visit, she hit the water quickly after walking into the cave. This time she took one step in and fell. Finally, the rush of cold came as her body was engulfed in water. She swam for the top and swam and swam. This definitely wasn't right. Not knowing when she'd eventually hit the water, she hadn't taken a deep breath, and the air was depleting rapidly in her lungs. Vivian stroked and kicked as fast as she could. Her insides burned with the need for oxygen, but she couldn't open her mouth. Not yet. Finally breaking the surface, she gulped in air along with splashed water. She coughed, but the air still felt good in her lungs. Calming the panic inside her, she looked around for Adriana. The cavern was completely black. "Here I am, child." Vivian spun in the water to see a dim glow of light on a rock. "What's wrong? Why can I hardly see you?" Vivian paddled to the edge, touched bottom, and dragged herself out. "The magic, my child," Adriana said. "Dark forces are attacking the island and draining the magic. We are dying." "You can't die. You're already dead," she reasoned. Vivian sat close to the light. Only then could she make out Adriana's nearly transparent form. Adriana smiled, and the light brightened a bit. "You know what I mean." "No, I don't," Vivian replied. She sighed. "I guess you really don't, do you? I've never known anything. After my parents died, I couldn't even come home. I was afraid Frank would kill me. He knew the leadership belonged to me. I am the only one alive who knows he's not a real Devereaux. His power has grown enough that the others won't question his lineage," Adriana said. "Your father wondered what his brother was doing during those years in Africa when he was supposed to be on a sabbatical." "He was in Africa? You were in school." "The other witches didn't like him much, so Frank being gone was fine by them." "So you think he was learning voodoo magic?" Vivian asked. Adriana replied. "The country is full of those who use the dark side to their advantage. Until they have to pay the piper. Then what? Then they have to give over their magic." "To whom? You can give your magic to someone?" Vivian had never heard of this. "Only if you die. The magic is sucked into a person or object, making her or it stronger." "But what if it's black magic? Is the person who received the magic going to be bad?" Vivian asked. Adriana chuckled. "No, child. Magic isn't black or white or green or brown. It exists in everything around you. This rock, the water, the ground, and the plants all have energy in and surrounding them. You exchange energy every time you come in contact with something. A witch is a sensitive who has the ability to take that energy and manipulate it to do things that can't be scientifically explained. That's magic. So in theory, the person wielding the power makes it good or bad in nature," Vivian clarified. Adriana nodded. "Yes. You understand now." Vivian snorted. "I do get it. For the first time. You should be a teacher. You explain that way better than anyone before." "Well, I have this problem called death." She smiled. "Oh, right. I keep forgetting since I'm talking with you." At that second, the light around Adriana faded a bit. "What's happening?" "My magic is draining with the islands. The dark forces must be stopped before we all die." "How do I stop it without magic?" Vivian asked in desperation. Adriana faded faster. "You don't. Magic is the only way to restore the balance." "But I don't have any. I'm not trained," Vivian cried out. "You are a Devereaux. Remember that always." The light disappeared, leaving only an echo in the cavern. Vivian sighed in the darkness. She waved her hand in front of her face. Nothing. Great. How did she get out of here without Adriana? Shit, what if she was stuck here? Died here? She hadn't told anyone where she was going. Calming herself, Vivian took another deep breath. If she listened to her surroundings, maybe could hear birds or the wind, hopefully leading to an exit. The villagers weren't too far from the cave. Well, she wasn't really in the island's cave, but the Cave of Souls, and for her sanity's sake they were similar enough. Quieting her mind, Vivian tuned into the environment, listening for anything. Her heart slowed, body relaxed. Scents bombarded her nose she hadn't noticed before. Mustiness, algae, the water even had a smell. The air was cool against her cheeks. She laid her hands on the rock she sat on. It was smooth and damp from humidity. Was she imagining this, or did the rock feel like it was vibrating? Maybe buzzing was a better word for it. She'd never felt this before. But how many rocks had she sat on in the concrete jungles she'd been living in all her life? Zilch. Stretching sideways, she reached for another rock. Her fingertips brushed something cool, and she rested her hand on it. Searching for the buzzing, she noticed it, but it was slightly different. The same but not. She bent to the other side, repeating the action. This time the rock felt right. She didn't know how else to explain it. There was nothing scientific to describe it. Wasn't that the definition of magic, according to Adriana? She slid toward the stone, feeling the others around it. Again, each rock felt the same but different. And one felt right. Moving toward those new rocks was the correct thing to do. It was what the rocks wanted. She knew it, felt it. Carefully, she picked her way over and around rocks based on what she felt. Was that crazy or what? Had she already lost her mind? Rocks couldn't tell someone where to go. When she reached out next, her hand hit a wall. Palms roamed the bumpy hardness, searching for an opening. Crouching, she found a hole in the wall. Who would have ever thunk that? How strange to find this in complete darkness. The hole seemed big enough for her to crawl through, so in she went. When she got out of this, her knees would be a bruised, bloody mess. She rubbed her hands along the tunnel's ground to see how gravelly or bumpy it was. Please be smooth, she thought. Suddenly tingles ran down her arms to her hands, and the uneven surface under her palms became flat. In shock, she snatched her hands back to her chest. What happened? Tentatively, she set her fingers on the ground. Damp, cool, and smooth. She walked her fingers forward, seeking the texture farther on. Beyond where her hands had been, the surface was rough. She waited for the rock under her palm to flatten. Nothing happened. Oh, come on. Was she hallucinating? Was she mistaken in what happened? She just wanted the ground to flatten. Tingles rushed down her arms and the rock reformed. Ah. The trick was to ask for what you wanted. Clearly, magic couldn't read your mind. She crawled for what felt like forever, her hands taking the energy the rock gave and in return giving whatever it wanted. She felt silly thinking of the rock as a living entity. Then a thought hit her. Maybe that was part of her problem. Magic wasn't real for her. For the past many years, she had to suppress her abilities to hide from Ricardo. During that time, she came to no longer believe in herself or her magic. At that moment, something inside her exploded open. The door she stuffed herself behind was gone. She felt a completeness that she'd never realized before. The smooth rock under her knees trembled, and dust particles fell from the top of the tunnel. Was that because of her coming into her power, or something else on the island? She worried Chandra could create damage beyond repair. She had to get out of the cave. Had to do what she could to save everything she loved. When her hand pushed forward along the bottom, the ground disappeared and she fell onto her stomach. Reaching both arms in front of her, they flailed in nothing but air.
Chapter 22. Rissa. Rissa and Maze sat in Frank's office, and not of their own accord. Magic was a huge factor keeping them in their seats. By the look on Maze's face, she knew he would tear into the witch given the chance. Taking the opportunity, her eyes raked down Maze's mostly healed body. Seeing all the deep gashes inflicted on him earlier scared her. She'd rarely seen injuries that bad in all her years on the force. No human would have survived. Frank started, "Thank you for making yourselves available." Maze growled, jerking forward in the chair, magic binding him. Sitting at his desk, Frank pushed back, avoid Maze's lunge so quickly that he rolled backward. The fear that crossed his face was funnier than his sarcasm. "Before you force us to listen to you," Rissa said, "can I ask you a question?" Frank resituated his tie and scooted toward the desk. "I suppose," he said. "Has this place always been such a dump, or just while you've been in charge?" His frown deepened. Color rose in his cheeks. Embarrassment or anger. Either was fine. "This dump, as you put it, is maintained to the best of our ability. Funds are low and go to more important things like food and security," the witch said. Her brows raised high. "Seriously? You have millions of dollars. How can funds be low?" "That is my personal money. And I share what I can with the community," he replied. Maze breathed deeply. She did the same. A sour tang hit the back of her tongue. Quite unpleasant. Was that what a lie smelled like? "Oh, I can tell by how well kept the basketball court out front is." She hoped her mocking him pissed him off. "You don't give a shit about these people. As long as you are in charge, that's all that matters." His lips pursed. "I've had a no." "How long have you been the leader?" she asked. He hesitated. "Since the last ruling family died in a wreck years ago," he replied. Interesting, she thought. Did you by chance play a part in that wreck to facilitate your rise to power? His hand slapped on the desk. "How dare you?" "Give it up, shithead," Maze replied. "I know when you're lying." Frank stared at Maze, then a grin spread on his face. The fabled shifter senses. "I'd always wondered if those myths were true. I guess they are." "So, now that we're all being truthful," Rissa said with a forced smile, "were you aware of what your casino partner Lupin was up to?" Frank's eyes rolled. "Of course. I allowed it, because I was getting a cut of the profits." "Was that your personal money, or community?" Maze sneered. They knew the answer already. "Neither," Frank shot back. "The piper must be paid." A memory popped into her mind. At the laboratory warehouse where the traffickers loaded on the night of her abduction and the initial blood exchange, a man named Ricardo had shown up, and Lupin had given him a suitcase of money. "Would this piper be named Ricardo?" she asked. Frank's face paled at the name. "That is none of your concern." Maze drew his brows down. "I know that name. He was on the island once. Attacked someone there." Frank's eyes widened. "He found a way onto the island?" "He never told." Frank smashed his lips together and sprang from his chair. He paced the room. Under his breath, he cursed Ricardo. "You two in cahoots to take over the island?" Rissa asked. Frank snorted. "That's all he talks about." He rubbed his hands together. Rissa noticed the scratches and burns on his hands. She wondered what happened. Spell backfire? Rissa felt they were running out of time. "So, why did you abduct Maze, and why are you keeping us here against our will?" "I'm using him to initiate a swap. The head of security would have been better, but he seldom comes ashore." He turned and slapped Maze on the shoulder, harder than necessary. "You will have to do." Frank sat at his desk, picked up a pen. "Then I can finally get that bastard off my back," he mumbled. He probably thought she and Maze didn't hear him. Humans wouldn't have. "So, if you get the island, then give it to Ricardo, you won't owe him any more money?" Rissa surmised. His eyes snapped up to hers. At first, he said nothing. Just glared and said yes. Maze laughed. "You're an idiot. Vivian will never trade the island for me." Frank stopped writing. Deep in thought. "I could have used her parents for this, except I already them killed. Damn." But I'd bet she'd be willing to swap Chandra, Maze said. The pen fell out of his hand. What do you know about her? He demanded. She's dead. Didn't look that way when we fished her from the ocean clinging to a piece of wreckage, Maze finished. Frank dropped his face into his hands. Rissa wondered if he was crying. She couldn't imagine that. When he looked up, his eyes were dry and smiling. Yes, we'll swap you for Chandra. He picked up his phone and asked someone to bring a kid to the office. That alarmed her. What was he going to do with a child? Frank continued writing. Did this guy not own a computer or typewriter? Really? When the door opened, the boy from the basketball court, Karsten, was pushed inside. He looked so scared. She wanted to protect this boy. Keep him from harm. Frank handed him an envelope. We're taking you to the marina to deliver this letter to a man named Quick, in a boat called Enchantment. Only give it to Quick. You got it? The boy nodded rapidly. Yes, sir. Only Quick. Maze interjected. He won't be at the marina anymore. He would have gone back to the island for more pressing matters. With narrowed eyes, Frank studied Maze, probably to see if he was lying. If the boat isn't there, then wait for it. The chief of security won't leave Maze hanging. He'll come back to look for him, Frank said. Now go. What about us? Rissa asked. Frank gave her an evil smile. Don't worry, officer. We have ways of keeping our guests entertained. Shall we go back to our torture room?
Chapter 23. Vivian. Vivian lay on her stomach in the tunnel of the cave, her arms and hands searching ahead for something but air. It was as if the tunnel stopped in the middle of nowhere. She brushed her fingers just past the opening and noted the rock's formation. She concluded she'd come out on a sheer drop. Like being on the edge of a cliff. How high up was she? If there ever was a need for light, this was it. Could rocks produce light? Couldn't hurt to ask. Hello? She said, calling out and hearing an echo return. The cavern must have been huge. I'd like to be able to see this room. Her hands lying on the rock surface tingled. The complete darkness she'd been in since Adriana faded out began to lighten. Were her eyes playing tricks on her? When she saw the stream 50 feet below, she knew the light was real. 50 feet? Holy shit! How was she to get down there? The stone wall housing the tunnel was practically vertical. Vivian laid her forehead on hands. There was no way she could climb down a flat rock wall. She'd have to go back and look for something else. Moving air tickled her ears. You are a Devereaux. Adriana's voice. Vivian sighed. She guessed that meant she wasn't turning around and going back. Okay, Vivian said, how do I get down there? She looked at the water flowing at the base of the cliff. This must have been where their fresh water source came from. If Adriana said there's a way down, then there was a way down. But she'd be damned if she didn't have a clue what it was. All right, Magic, I'll put the solution in your hands. I want to get out of this room. How do I do that? The cave began to tremble like an earthquake shook the land. The rock at the base of the tunnel shifted and jutted out, then below it, another section of rock pushed out a foot farther. This continued until the last step ended at the water. To say she was shocked didn't begin to cover it. How had she never seen something like this? Well, how many times had she been lost in a cave 50 feet in the air? Slowly she picked her way down the steps to the water's edge. Stopping on the second-to-last stair, she sat and studied the rock. The light in the room was coming from the rocks. Specks of sparkly flakes reflected light in all the stones. If she remembered her Earth properties course, the thin whitish mineral was called mica. Maybe some quartz too. But where was the light originating for the minerals to reflect? She'd ask Adriana later. So the stream was the way out. She'd follow it until it led to the daylight. Easy peasy. The flow was nearly silent, with no rocks to cause rapids or drops to create waterfalls yet. Even though the room was dim, she could see to the bottom of the channel. It wasn't very deep. The stones twinkled like stars in the night sky. Was it more minerals or something else? Crouching, she reached into the water to see if she could reach the bottom. Her fingers looked to be on the base rock, but she didn't feel anything. She knew water skewed perception. But how much? She sat on the narrow rocks lining the stream and let her feet dangle in the water, sandals and all. It was warm but refreshing. And very relaxing. Vivian leaned forward and let her hands float in the lazy current. She wondered if water buzzed like the rocks did. Narrowing her attention to submerged body parts, she let her senses take in what was there. Vivian didn't notice a buzzing vibration, but more like a low-level hum. Like the tide on the ocean, the hum ebbed and flowed, rocking her into a serene embrace. Warmth surrounded her, cocooning her in a sense of security. It felt so good. Hot tub and hour-long massage good. Her arms floated out to side. Wait. She opened her eyes, not remembering closing them, then spluttered when she realized she was in the middle of the stream. How had that happened? Memories of her childhood came back. The summers of swimming in the Witch community's in-ground pool. It was huge, allowing all the kids in at the same time. If they needed it bigger, then a little magic took care of that. Then after a long afternoon of playing in the pool, Mom would bring out a picnic lunch, and she and her friends, which was every child, gathered under one of the many grand trees and munched on sandwiches and chips. She remembered all the flowers her mom maintained in the community. Her mom loved begonia and lilacs. Vivian loved picking the dandelions and blowing the fairy-like seeds into the wind. The soft hum continued to rock her, flowed through her as she floated through the water. Was it her imagination, or was the current moving faster? Maybe she was coming to the end of the cave. Treading water, she scanned the way ahead. There wasn't any sunlight coming in. In fact, the sparkling rock completely surrounded her still. That meant there was only one direction the water could go. Under. In a slight panic, she thrashed her arms and legs, aiming for the bankside. The wall where the water dove down was much closer. Her lungs were already tightening from the expectation of being airless too long. She'd stayed alive all these years, running from the strongest wizard on the planet only to die in a stream 6 foot deep. Breathing heavily, Vivian sucked as much air as she could. Please let me get through this before running out of oxygen. That's all she wanted, to live through this. She ducked to keep from smashing her head against the rock, and went under. First thing she noticed was the rocks under the water and along the sides still lit up. The next thing she noticed was the speed at which she moved. Her hair streamed back, her clothing doing little to drag her down. The specks of lights lengthened into long blurs, zipping past. It was like she was in a spaceship, jumping to warp speed. Which was great. She was running out of air. Eyes searching for the end, she pinched her nose to keep away temptation to inhale. Funny that she was in this same situation not too long ago, when falling into the water in the Cave of Souls. This felt different though. She sensed the life, or the magic in the element. It was there to serve her as well as ask service in return. A give and share relationship. Her lungs burned again. Please hurry. Her speed picked up. She closed her eyes against the oncoming pressure. Please. Vivian came to a screeching halt, and her head popped above the waterline. Her first intake of air was loud and long. The water floated her to the side, where she could grab a hold of the rocks and climb out. At the top of the slope, she collapsed and rolled onto her back, still panting for air, clothes dripping wet. This cave was a bitch to go through. How much more could there be? She cringed. Shouldn't have said that. The universe had a sick sense of humor, she'd learned. As she lay there, she realized the room was lit with sunlight and not the minerals in the rock. She got to her feet and saw a crack in the rock wall. On the other side of a lava pit.
Chapter 24. Quick. Quick pulled up to the pier on the mainland and tied off the boat. Thank you for bringing me back, Quick, Anne said. We always try to have 2 people in the office at all times. Not a problem. It was on my way. He smiled, even though he was about to come out of his skin to get searching for Maze. If you don't find Maze soon, let me know. We can perform a locating spell. We just need something of his, Anne told him. A locating spell? Quick replied. Didn't know you could do that. We can do a lot of things. You just have to ask, and not be stuck to the island so much. Agreed. He helped her from the boat and followed behind. When they stepped off the pier, a boy slipped out of the shadows. Are you Quick? His brows rose and he glanced at Anne. She shrugged. I am. And who are you? He asked. I'm Karsten. Coven leader Bonaparte said to give you this. The boy held out the envelope. Quick took it from him and tore open the flap on the back. Her scanned the letter and handed it to Anne. So the witches, more specifically Frank, had Maze and Rissa. How she got mixed in, who knew? Anne handed back the letter. Well, at least we know where he is now, she said. That's a plus. She shook her head. I can't believe he'd stoop this low. I knew we should have never let him take over when Stephen and Lila died. The boy was clearly listening to everything they said. Should they be talking in front of him? Karsten, is someone here to take you back? I'm supposed to call my mom after I delivered the letter, he said. Anne pulled out her cell phone and handed it to him. What are you going to do? She asked Quick. I will talk with Gerald, but basically, as the demand letter states, I'm bringing Chandra back in an hour for an exchange, he answered. Tom and I will nearby, she said. We can't be too close or they will detect us. The letter says for you to come alone. That can't be good. I don't see Frank playing fair. Me either. But I don't see much choice. The boy handed Anne's phone back to her with a thank you. Anne started up the hill to the sidewalk leading to the street their office was on. Quick sighed and looked at Karsten. So, you a witch too? Quick asked. I'm going to be a wizard when I get older. Mom said I can be as strong as the coven leader if I practice a lot like he did. Really? Quick replied. Yeah, then I can take Mom with me and live somewhere else. The boy cringed a bit. Quick frowned. Why would you do that? Don't you like it here? The child stared at his feet. It's okay. He glanced up the parking lot. I'm gonna wait for Mom at the entrance so she doesn't have to come all the way down here. With that, he shot away, running through the parking lot at full speed. Quick crossed his arms over his chest. What was that all about? He'd have to ask Wizen when he got back. In a few minutes, a car slowed and turned onto the gravel entrance. The boy got in the car without looking back. Quick hurried back to the boat. He had an exchange to prepare for. Outside of the no-wake zone, he saw something floating. After fishing it out of the water, he realized it was part of a boat, similar to the piece Chandra floated in on. He lifted his nose to the air and breathed deeply. The tang of smoke tickled his nostrils. Seemed Wizen was right about a boat exploding. Where was the rest of the wreckage? Did it sink? That was something he'd worry about later. Passing through the fog, he reached the island, then tied the boat to a vertical post. Wizen, Sarah, and an angry Chandra still sat on Vivian's back porch. But Vivian hadn't returned. That worried him. Should he look for her? He would, after he took care of the exchange. Time was short. Gerald stood when he saw Quick come around the corner of Vivian's home. What's happened? Why are you back already? Quick held up the envelope. There's been a development. With a frown, Gerald took the rumpled paper from Quick's fingers and read the contents. This I had not expected, the attorney said, passing the sheet to Sarah. Quick sat at the table and took the straw and umbrella from his partially melted drink. Thoughts? He asked before he guzzled the lemonade. Sarah crumpled the letter in her hand. She was seething hot. The paper wad disappeared from her fist. Only a wisp of smoke remained. I'll kill him and feed him to the sharks, she said. That bastard has got to go. He's done nothing but trash everything about the coven. Chandra perked up. Is that from Frank? I told you he'd come for me. Shut it, Quick groused. Chandra sneered but said nothing. Gerald leaned back in his chair and said, I think you should go through with the swap. Sarah laughed. That bastard will have something up his sleeve. It'll be a trap of some kind. I suspect so, Quick said. But what other choice is there? He sighed. When the time came, Gerald and Sarah walked Chandra to the boat, the salt container still around her hands. Will she be okay? Quick asked. Meaning, was she going to be a pain in the ass? She'll be fine. We'll watch her, Sarah replied. Yeah, about that, Quick started. I'd prefer if you both stayed on the island and maybe looked for Vivian. I'm worried that she's not back. Strange things are happening, and she could need help with something. And the note says to come alone. So. Gerald and Sarah shared a frown. She's probably at the cave on the other side. If you want to check around here, please do. When I get back, we'll all go to the cave. Quick could tell Gerald and Sarah weren't thrilled with the idea of staying behind. Too bad. The letter said to come alone. Chandra's hands were buried in salt, so what could happen? When Quick and Chandra arrived back on the mainland, they found Maze and Rissa on the pier waiting. Maze looked around for anything suspicious. What did Frank have planned? After docking, he helped Chandra up. She jerked away at his touch. Quick stepped back and raised his hands. Just trying to help. He gestured for her to get out on her own. With her hands bound, it was going to be difficult. If she fell in, he'd laugh. Maze and Rissa had already started down the dock's central walkway. Chandra needed to hurry. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement close to the boat. Was this the trap? He turned, ready. It was Karsten standing in the shadows. What are you doing here? Quick asked. My mom said to escape with you if I could. Yet another thing Quick hadn't expected. After sending no lies in the air, he told the boy to jump on as soon as the two adults got in. Maze and Rissa were much closer to him than Chandra was to the witches on the far side of the pier. That made Quick nervous. Plus, nothing had happened yet. And he didn't see Frank among the witches. Damn it. Where was he? Quick looked around the harbor for others in boats and boats idling. Nothing. All seemed clear. A shout from the main walkway on the pier turned his head. Maze and Rissa had each grabbed one of Chandra's arms and were dragging her back to the boat. What are you doing? Quick yelled. Let her go. Just get in the boat. Karsten came flying from his hiding spot, vaulted a low railing, and landed in the front of the boat. He stayed on the floor, curled in a ball. Quick bit back any words he was going to say to him. The other three practically fell into the boat, telling Quick to get them out of there. Already, a fireball had hit the water behind the vessel, sizzling as it died. Quick threw it in reverse and gunned the throttle, almost knocking himself out of the driver's seat. The others were on the floor, splayed out. More fireballs blazed past them. Heading for the fog at full speed, a strange scent reached his nose. He didn't have time to dwell on it. Perhaps in a minute, when they were on the other side. He hit the heavy mist hard, and it tossed the boat. Quick clung to the side railing and tried to steer with his other hand. Granted, he was coming in hot, but the fog had never bothered the boat. Something was wrong. His animal instincts tingled in his body, preparing him for fight or flight. Arriving on the other side to calm waters, Quick throttled completely down, leaving the boat in idle. Everyone all right? He asked. The boy was wide-eyed and looked a bit traumatized. Quick felt really bad about that. Sorry, kid. I don't normally drive that way. Karsten slowly nodded and scooted to the corner. Quick turned to Maze and Rissa, who were in the back. What in the hell, Maze? Why would you pull a stunt? Then the strange smell was back. He should have been scenting Maze, but he wasn't. His eyes narrowed. What's going on here? The light around Maze and Rissa wavered, and when it cleared, Frank and another man stood there. They had glamored themselves. Chandra climbed to her feet. I knew you'd find a way through to me. Frank's brow raised. You aren't the reason I'm here. The island is. Quick stepped back. What the hell should he do now? Whatever you do, don't hurt the boy, Quick said. He's just a kid. Frank and his friend laughed. You got it, Wolf. We won't touch the boy. Frank moved closer to Quick. You, on the other hand, won't get off so easily. Frank snapped his fingers and Quick felt his body stiffen. He couldn't move if he wanted to. The wizard called out to his accomplice. Give me a hand. Together, they wrangled him to the back of the boat. Then they pushed him over the side.
Chapter 25. Gerald. Gerald and Sarah stood on the beach. Ian had joined them in the search for Vivian. Ian felt terrible about Chandra. He was the one to spot her and bring her on the island. If he hadn't, maybe Vivian wouldn't be missing. When they heard the boat, they hurried to what was left of the pier. Maze had tied the boat off, and Rissa was walking toward them. Detective Belgrande, Gerald said, good to see you again. Same here, she replied. Why are you here? Quick was doing a hostage exchange, Sarah asked. Well, I found Maze in the compound and got caught myself. Frank wanted to get rid of me, too. I was very fortunate. Yes, Sarah said, quite fortunate. Maze came up behind Rissa. Let's go, he said. To the cave. Gerald asked. Where's Quick? He's fixing something on the boat, Maze answered. When we entered the fog, something happened and the boat felt like it was tossed like a toy. He said to get started and he'd catch up. Won't take long. Ian led the way to the cave as Gerald, Sarah, Maze, and Rissa followed. Ian felt agitated. His shifter animal was telling him something was wrong. Mr. Wizen, Ian said, there's something I want to show you. Sarah, head for the twisted tree and we'll be there shortly. Take a rest. Sarah eyed him. Be right back, Ian called out, hurrying Gerald into the trees. When they were a good distance from the group, Ian said, Mr. Wizen, something isn't right. Maze doesn't smell like Maze, and he was lying about Quick fixing the boat. I could scent his lie. Gerald rubbed his hand over his chin. Do you know who he smells like? No, Ian replied. I've never smelled it before. Sarah's scream echoed through the battered woods. Both men ran back the direction they had come. Suddenly, Ian pushed Gerald to the ground as a sword of lightning cut through where they were standing. Thank you, Gerald said. I owe you a nice steak dinner. After this, Ian said. Right now, Sarah is in trouble. I won't let her die. Ian peeked around a thick tree to see Frank Bonaparte and his second throwing fireballs and daggers of lightning at Sarah, who was hidden behind brush, but returning her own fire. He was completely confused how these two were on the island, but he'd ask questions later. Gerald cupped his hands together, chanting the spell for an electricity ball. When the sphere had formed, he threw it toward the two men with their backs to him. The ball hit the second's shoulder, sending him shaking to the ground as electric bolts coursed through his body. Frank saw his man fall and looked back to see Gerald. Good afternoon, Frank. I'd say it's good to see you, but I'd be lying. Frank whipped his hand up, sending arrows of electricity charging the older man. Sarah used that moment of distraction to blast him with fire. Before she could recite the spell, Frank's second threw a block against her, slamming her to the ground. Gerald dodged and retreated farther into the forest. He needed to get to Sarah. You bastard, she called out. These are my favorite shoes. Now look at them. Ian and Gerald spied through the trees on the way around to Sarah and watched as she sent Frank and his second slamming into trees, sliding to the ground. Damn it, Sarah said. Ian took her arm and helped her off the ground. Hurry, he said. We need to find a place for an ambush. I like the sound of that, she groused. Smoke floated in the air. A wild bush had caught fire. A fireball zipped past Gerald's head and crashed into a tree, setting it aflame. Many of the trees were snapped toward the tops and leaning against others, ready to quickly spread flames.
This did not bode well for the island. Lightning struck Sarah in the shoulder and she went down. Gerald dropped to the ground and returned strikes. Sarah. You all right? Ian asked, panting for air. I'll live, she said, getting to her knees, but I'm not happy about getting hit. She loosed her power in the direction of the men and smiled when they cried out. Serves them right. Jerks. Backtracking, they edged closer to the men, wondering what they were doing. Had they given up? No, they were talking with Chandra. What the hell? With 3 against 2, those odds weren't stacking up of their side. Come, Gerald said, we need a place to make a plan of attack. As they trudged through the mess of downed limbs, the fire overhead erupted into an inferno with the availability of so much wood. Nothing but a great power with the elements would contain the raging flames. Sarah and Gerald fled, not knowing where they were going. Where has Ian disappeared to? Gerald huffed. A guide would have been nice. I sent him back to warn the others and keep them safe, she answered. Laser-like blasts blew by them, slamming into trees, shattering the trunks into split strands. More and more magical ammunition came at them, decimating a path through the forest. The two were now completely on the defensive, running for their lives against 3 powerful mages. Flames had surpassed them overhead, racing them toward the wood's edge. Bursting through the tree line, they had reached the volcano caves where Vivian supposedly was. Not that she could help them. Her abilities were those of a child. They had also reached the end of the path. Another step would take them over the cliff. They slid to a stop, looking for another way to go. The only trail took them back into the forest. And it was too late for that. Frank, his wizard, and Chandra stepped out from the trees. Looks like you're in a pickle, Frank said. It does indeed, Gerald replied. How about you back off and let us return to the mainland? Frank laughed. Just so you can put together a small army and come back. Not going to happen, old man. Behind the 3, the forest had become an impenetrable wall of fire. It looked like the gates of hell. Which surprised Gerald. He knew if the island had enough power, it would protect itself from natural disasters like fire and tsunamis. Nothing slowed the conflagration now. Frank stepped forward. Goodbye, Gerald. Goodbye, Sarah. Sarah conjured a shield in front of herself and Gerald. You always sucked as a leader. You are nothing compared to Stephen and Lila. Sarah smiled as Frank's face turned red. Gerald knew, had always hated being compared to his older brother. His brother was always better. Frank threw a ball of energy at them, hitting the shield Sarah created, pushing them backward. Doesn't matter anymore. My brother's family is mostly dead. I rule with complete reign, Frank spouted. Yeah, about that, Sarah said. Do you know you were adopted? You're not a Devereaux. Frank charged Sarah and Gerald landed a small explosion at Frank's feet to stop him. The other 2 joined their leader. Then the 3 shot energy against Sarah's shield. Their combined strength was too much for her to hold. She and Gerald had no chance in winning. They were pushed to the edge of the cliff. Then everything stopped.
Chapter 26. Vivian. Staring at the lava pit between her and the way out, Vivian almost cried in frustration. Hadn't she had enough? She lay on the ground on her back. Her breathing hadn't returned to normal from the water tunnel escapade. Her mind and body were exhausted. She was a city girl, used to concrete under her feet and terrible water from the tap. The heat from the pit surrounded her. It felt relaxing, yet invigorating at the same time. She breathed in the warmth and let it settle in her lungs. Closing her eyes, she picked up on a hissing sound. Not like a snake, but like when fire is put out with water. It sizzles and hisses. That was it. The sizzles had a cadence to them. A low beat like that of a heart pulsing blood through the body. And wasn't that what lava was for the most part? It flowed through the land, carving tunnels and burning any debris in the way to leave behind fresh, clean, hot renewal. If she remembered her Earth Properties class, lava was what started life on the planet, underwater vents providing warmth in the cold sea for life to cling to and grow. Plus lava flows created land. Islands in the oceans just like Skull Point Cay. Flora taking root to expand into lush grasses and forests. Her island was beautiful. Had a few broken trees right now. But they would be easily cleaned up soon. They would create a huge bonfire and let the flames return the wood to ash, the same as when born. Ashes to ashes. Her heart had finally slowed, and she noted it beat in time with the sizzle of the fire, the lava. She understood the harsh element's place in the cycle of life. It cleansed and renewed. She felt it wanting to give to her. Same as the water and rocks had given to her. She opened her soul to the heat and let it do its thing. It was magic. No scientific explanation required. Her energy level boosted tenfold from what it was when she emerged from the water. Breathing deeply, she took the heat into herself. Comforting. Sitting up, she noted her clothes were dry. Understandable when lying next to melted volcanic rock for a period of time. She glanced at the other side of the pit, where the gap in the rock showed sunshine. Her way out. But how was she to get over there? She looked around for something, anything that might help her with her goal. Unless she wanted to move a ton of boulders, there wasn't much in the way of ideas. Was this the end of the road? No. She wouldn't let it be. She was almost out. Quieting her mind and spirit, she brought forth the hissing sound, the feel of the heat in her lungs. I need to get to the other side. With no sounds or vibration under her feet, she peeked an eye open. Nothing had happened. She let out a sigh. What was she doing wrong? Could I please get a bridge over the lava, so I may reach the other side? Why she specified a bridge, she didn't know. Common sense, probably. Well, as common as magic could be. In the middle of the pit, a strip of lava hardened and darkened. It stretched out both ways, reaching her the same time it did the other side. Looking at it, she was a bit concerned. Maybe a bit wider, like 2 feet? She laughed at herself for talking out loud. Like the magic could hear her. Perhaps it did. The trail of hardened rock widened on both sides. She thought about touching it to see how hot it was, but then thought better. She trusted this element. She knew it would not hurt her now. Not wasting any more time, she crossed the passage quickly, being careful to focus straight ahead and not on what was 12 inches from her sandals. Vivian stepped off the path, turned and ran for the exit. So ready to get the hell out of this damn cave. Sliding through the crack, she came to a stop. Yes, there was an opening to the outside world in there. And yes, it was 30 feet over her head. Stepping into the dome-shaped space, wind whipped her hair up and snapped at her clothes. She was basically standing in a wind tunnel. Fantastic. This was the end. There was no climbing the sides. Since the dome narrowed the higher it went, stairs wouldn't work. There wasn't anything to build a bridge. Vivian plopped to the ground, beaten and downhearted. The energy from the lava had gone from her, out to the top of the dome with the wind. She screamed out her frustration. Why was this happening to her? What had she done so that the gods hated her? She rolled onto her stomach and laid her forehead on her hands. The same thing she'd done when feeling defeated in the rock tunnel, which felt like days ago. Vivian. She heard her name on the wind. She lay silent and listened more. Listening seemed to be a big key in discovery. She'd always remembered that now. The air moved around her, circling like a tiny tornado. She heard a high-pitched note, like a whistle. A note plucked on a piano or guitar. Beautiful in its simplicity. Vivian. There it was again, her name. Could it be Adriana calling to her? Was this her time to die? Starve to death in a wind tunnel? Child, Adriana said on the air, dramatization? No. I'm really stuck. There's no way out. Vivian, what have you accomplished since I left you in the Cave of Souls? Accomplished? Well, I haven't gotten myself killed yet. But that ends here. Adriana sighed. Child, don't be so obtuse. One of your other aunts did the same thing. Always giving up without even trying. She shrugged, not knowing if Adriana could see her or not. What have you learned? She had to answer, apparently. I discovered that rocks buzz with energy. And if I asked for what I wanted, they led me to the answer. Very good. What else? I learned I can hold my breath a lot longer than I thought. Try again, child. Yeah, I get it. The water hummed its own lullaby. Taking and giving with me. If I asked for what I needed, it led me to the solution. The lava? It rejuvenated me, made me feel energized. It hissed and came to my rescue when needing to cross over. And here? So far not much here. Vivian heard Adriana's sigh and smiled. I'm just playing. I see now what my little journey has done. It has taught me how to feel the magic. Something I didn't have before now. You have the keys to powerful magic, Vivian. Devereaux magic. You have joined with the elements to share an energy, the magic, the island holds. So how do I get out of here to use that magic? Before Adriana could answer, she said, Wait. I know. Yes, you do. Adriana. Yes. Thank you for helping me, for taking me in and giving me a home. I'd still be on the streets, running from Ricardo if not for you. Take care of the beautiful island for me. I will. Vivian stood and opened herself to connect with the wind, the whistle that penetrated her and flowed through her. I need to exit the cave through the top of the dome. Will you please help me? Pressure squeezed around her body, as if being secured in a blanket. She felt her body defy gravity. Magic has no logical reason. It just is. The sun felt good on her chilled cheeks. Even the smell of the salty air was welcome. She came to a rest, and had to shield her eyes from the bright light. What she saw when she opened them crushed her soul. Chapter 27. Vivian. Vivian's feet rested on the rocky ground. But she didn't feel it as she collapsed to her knees. The beautiful island no longer existed. Only a brown, burning, narrow swath of dirt surrounded by stunning blue. The sugary beaches were wiped out. Water beat against the rocky cliff sides. The air was filled with smoke and floating ash. Only a red haze of the burning forest could be seen through the thick atmosphere. The island was volcanic in nature, but this was Armageddon. Voices drifted up from far below. Vivian scooted to the side and looked down. Breath caught in her throat. Mr. Wizen and Sarah were backed to the edge of the cliff. Frank, Chandra, and some guy were pushing them with magic. Sarah had only inches before she fell. Frank lashed a new wave against Sarah. She leaned backward, the cliff edge crumbling. Stop. Vivian cried out, hands stretched to them, palms out. To her amazement, they froze, like mannequins in a department store window display. Rock steps leading down to the scene slid out for her. Vivian hurried down, each step sliding in once her foot left its surface. Vivian stood face to face with a bolt of electricity and a ball of fire halfway between the good and bad witches. She picked up a stick and batted both to the ground. When the missiles hit the soil, they burst into white light, and that light was sucked into the terrain. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, maybe a mini explosion, but the light absorbed by the dirt wasn't it. Vivian next tried to move Sarah away from the edge. That didn't work as well. The only way Sarah moved was by tipping. So Vivian tilted her forward, struggling to not drop her on the ground. Mr. Wizen leaned forward. He would be safe when he snapped out of his current state. She turned to the three bad guys. Knocking them to the ground would be best. As she approached them, clapping noise off to the side drew her attention. A boy walked toward her, as if applauding a stage show. The innocence of the child in the middle of a burning hell was striking. Hey buddy, Vivian said. How about you sit by the volcano rock so the fire doesn't get to you? What's your name? The boy gave her a smile that seemed ill-begotten on a young face. I'd say my name was Karsten. The voice was too deep for a boy. Plus, Vivian recognized it and chills raced down her back. But I'd be lying. At that moment, the child's image blurred and morphed. When it cleared, Ricardo stood before her. He'd glamored himself to get on the island. Fear stole her logical thought. She almost died the last time she faced this all-powerful wizard. This time, Adriana wasn't there to save her. Maybe she could distract him until, what? She was on her own. Her mind raced for a way to distract him. She could run then. Ricardo, why don't you give it up? Frank Chandra and his witches will overtake you in a fight. They want the island and won't give it to you. Chandra made that perfectly clear. Ricardo glanced at the three, standing frozen. You mean these wretches? He waved a finger and a whip made of fire slashed around the air, slicing through Frank's neck, then Chandra's and the unknown wizards. Their heads didn't roll, but a bright light consumed their bodies. Just like the fireball and bolt, the light soaked into the ground. Instantly, Vivian felt stronger, felt more energized. The connection to the island flowed through her. She inhaled a deep breath, taking all the island's elements into her. Fire, air, water, earth. She asked the fire to cease, to release itself into the air, to no longer consume the earthly flora. The flames died out, leaving behind black scars reaching for the sky. Tears erupted from her eyes, not from ash and smoke, but the feeling of death being so close. The island was not going to make it without a large infusion of magic. Ricardo turned a raised brow at her. I see you've learned some things since we last saw each other, he said. I've learned the pathway to everything I care for, she replied. Ricardo whipped his hand through the air, and Vivian flew backward, crashing into a tree. Nothing about defending yourself, I see. That was true. Defending herself came second to saving the island and serving others. She picked herself up and ran into the woods. If he couldn't see her, he couldn't spell her. Hopefully. You can run, dearest, but I will find you, he said in the distance. Suddenly, he was standing in front of her. She tried to stop but knocked into him. He grabbed her hand and slashed across her palm with a ritual blade. What the hell are you doing? She shouted and tried to rip her hand away, but he held tightly, blood running between her fingers. He laughed. I found a much easier way to take this island from you. You should be happy. You may live though this. You will never rule this island, Vivian yelled. I won't let you. Ricardo laughed again. You have no say, little girl. After your blood mingles with mine, I will have Devereaux power in me. That's all I need. So simple, isn't it? With his free hand he slashed his palm holding her wrist, then lifted her arm for her blood to flow over his cut. Vivian yanked and tried to pull away. She wasn't strong enough. If she couldn't do it on her own, she'd ask for help. Behind Ricardo's head, a tree limb bent backward, then snapped forward, smacking him in the back of the head. He flew at her as she dove sideways, tearing her arm from his, and took off running. She wrapped the bottom of her shirt around her hand to quell the bleeding. The material was quickly soaked. What now? Where could she go? Where was Quick? No, she couldn't go to him. He'd be killed because of her cowardness. You're pissing me off, the wizard yelled. Give me what I want and I'll let all the shifters live. She grunted. Liar. He'd kill them all the first chance he got. Spots of green blossomed among the charred remains of woods. The magic drained from the three witches restored some what was needed. Signs of life existed here and there. Ricardo popped in front of her again. This time she was ready. Vines hanging limply along trunks sprang toward Ricardo, strapping his arms and pinning them to his sides. Vivian stopped, hoping they would hold. A sudden blue brilliance glowed around him, blasting away the partially burnt ivies. Tree roots exploded from the ground, grabbing the wizard and slinging him from tree to tree toward the freshwater stream in the middle of the island. Vivian followed after him, guiding and helping where she could. This magic was like no other she'd ever seen. Other witches used chants and spells and potions to get what they wanted. Here, all Vivian had to do was think what she wanted and it was done. Yes, Vivian. You understand. Adriana's voice floated to her. You and the island are the same. Take care of each other. As they reached the water, a liquid rope stretched and wrapped around Ricardo. It pulled him under. His eyes glared hatred at her. His mouth moved, chanting. He was still able to cast spells. A boulder resting at the side of the stream uprooted and splashed into the water, slamming the evil wizard in the head. Blood rolled with current. Vivian gasped at the violence of it, but the bastard didn't deserve that quick of a death. He was getting off easy. A wave pushed the body onto the singed ground. Burnt foliage and bark padded his resting place. A high-pitched whistle pierced the air, and a cloud funnel dropped from the clear sky. Her hair whipped around her face, stinging her cheeks. Debris and ash lifted from the ground filled the air. The trees bent away from standing over Ricardo, and Vivian was shoved backward by sheer force. She was sure she'd slam into a tree and die, but warm, wet arms surrounded her, keeping her from flying away. Vivian held her hair back and looked into Quick's bloodshot eyes. Where the hell have you been? She yelled above tornado noise. Taking a dip in the ocean. You? He asked. I thought I'd hike through the volcano mountain, she replied. The wind scooped the wizard's body from the ground into the air far above the treetops. A nova burst so bright that they had to shade their eyes exploded above the island. Like fireworks, the pieces fell to earth, leaving long streaming trails in the air. As each fiery fragment hit the ground, it was absorbed. Millions of sparks seeped into the dirt that slowly sprouted new grass, new ferns, and new vegetation wiped out by the blaze. Trees grew new canopies as they watched. Bugs and critters bounded from every direction, digging in and restarting their parts in the cycle. But the most profound was Vivian feeling the island coming back to life. Ricardo's immense power had restored the magic reservoir depleted by Frank and his witches. She felt truly alive for the first time since her parents passed away. She hugged Quick while the fireworks continued to scatter around them. They would all survive, including the island. And ironically, she had Ricardo to thank for that. Cheers and shouts burst from the trees surrounding them. Vivian pulled away from Quick, her shirt wet from being against him. Wolves and humans came into view, celebrating like they had won a great victory. Ian led the group toward them. Quick smiled. Looks like their faith in you to protect the island is ensured. How did you learn all this? Vivian returned his smile. As my aunt would say, don't ask. It's magic. Epilogue. Vivian. The group, Vivian and Quick, Maze and Rissa, Gerald, Sarah, Anne, and Tom, sat on chairs and love seats around a fire pit on Vivian's back porch. A few hours had passed since the end of the craziness with Frank's clan and Ricardo's death. Though by the look of the completely restored island and the clear night sky, no one would have known a catastrophe had occurred 14 hours ago. The power of magic was unbelievable. So how did you not drown after being thrown into the water if you were spelled? Vivian asked Quick. She wanted to know how in the world that was possible. Quick raised a brow at her. What was I dumped into? He asked. What do you mean? She answered. You were tossed overboard. Into what? Water, she said like she was explaining to a 5-year-old. What kind of water? He replied, tapping her on the nose. Then it dawned on her. Salt water. Now she felt dumb. The salt in the water killed the spell as soon as it touched you. You are so smart. She grunted and poked him in the ribs. The others laughed at their playfulness after a day filled with horrors and death. This distraction was greatly needed. Oh, Vivian, Gerald said. Tom and Anne told me about the desperate condition of the witch compound. Shit, Rissa said, it's a desert prison. There has to be something that can be done for those living there. It's horrendous. I had no idea, Vivian said. Gerald, what can we do to help? You've done plenty, young lady, Mr. Wizen replied. You are now the coven leader. Leader? Vivian said, shocked. But I'm not a leader. I don't know how. Gerald raised his hands. It will be fine, Vivian. The coven will know all about you, and I'm sure they will welcome you with open hearts and arms. Many wondered if you were ever coming back after your parents died. They don't know Frank almost killed me when I tried, she asked. They will know the entire story by this time tomorrow, he replied. Have no worries about the mainland. Can the island support the coven somehow? Vivian asked. We have so much here. And if they have nothing, I. Spoken like a true Devereaux, Gerald said. Thanks to Frank, believe it or not, the compound is capable of supporting itself quite well now. All his belongings are bequeathed to the coven. That includes the casino and its profits. Well then, Vivian said, never mind. But I will insist that Wits and Wiz Associates take over any responsibilities you can to make sure everything runs as it should with the coven and outsiders. We're honored, Tom said, glancing at Gerald and Anne. Yes, Anne replied. We will do our best to make things honest and fair for everyone involved. And, Mays interrupted, thank you Tom and Anne for getting Rissa and me out of the compound this afternoon. Without your help. Not a problem, Anne said. One of the children's mothers called to tell us she'd seen Rissa wandering around, and her son said some guys in the van came speeding into the storage house garage. We figured something was up. Tom added, we had no idea we'd find you two there, but glad we did. Now Frank will no longer cause problems. You have no idea how glad I am to hear that, Vivian said. Same for Ricardo. From the renewed forest, a group of the native island villagers marched a line to her porch. Vivian and her guests stood in anticipation of the reason for the visit. Chieftain Earthen stopped in front of her and bowed. Vivian felt her cheeks flush with heat. What was this powerful man doing, paying homage to her? Vivian Devereaux, great niece to Adriana Devereaux, I, Earthen LaRouge, guardian of the island, welcome you as the newest custodian of the island. With your newfound connection to the island, it has chosen you to take care of the inhabitants. With that, the crowd cheered and applauded. Vivian had truly found her home. After years of being on the run, her life was finally ready to begin. With new friends and a deep love for the man holding her hand, she could handle anything. Didn't hurt that a little magic was on her side either.
I hope you've enjoyed this latest production. Don't forget to subscribe and to ring the bell to be notified of new releases.